A quiet descent into the dark, framing Darth Maul's full story. The galaxy is never truly silent, even at night. Far from the bright lanes of Coruscant and the crowded halls of any Jedi temple, there are regions where the stars feel older and the shadows seem to remember. Out there, forgotten battlefields drift in the dark, shattered cruisers turning slowly through the void. Their only witnesses the distant shimmer of hyperspace lanes and the soft hum of passing freighters. In that quiet, a single red blade ignites, carving a thin line of light against endless black. Most people know the figure who holds that blade only in fragments. A horned silhouette pacing behind blast doors, a sudden attack in a desert, a double-bladed weapon spinning to life, a furious duel in the heart of a palace, then a fall. For many viewers, Darth Maul appeared in the Phantom Menace as a silent assassin and vanished just as quickly, cut down by a young Jedi Knight and seemingly erased from the story. But his true life stretches far beyond that brief appearance, from a stolen childhood on Dathomir to a lonely death beneath twin suns. Underneath the surface of the films, Maul's path winds through places the main saga only hints at. He was taken as a child from the world of the Night Sisters, shaped by Mother Talzin's designs and Darth Sidious' cruel vision into something closer to a living weapon than a person. The reason was simple. Sidious needed an instrument of pure hatred, a blade to strike at the Jedi Order, while the larger plan unfolded in secret. As a result, Maul's entire existence became focused on one purpose: destroy the Jedi, and especially the master and apprentice who would one day land on Naboo. This video will follow that entire journey in a long, measured, storybook-style way. From brutal Sith training in hidden chambers, to the Naboo crisis and Maul's apparent death, to the years of madness spent clinging to life on a junk world, every phase of his rise and fall will be explored. You do not need to stay alert or keep track of every name and battle. You can rest, study, or even drift off to sleep. The story will still be here when you return. Maul's lore reaches far beyond the movies, flowing through the Clone Wars, Rebels, comics, and reference books that quietly expand his fate. We will see his rebirth with cybernetic legs, his rise as a warlord over Mandalore, and his final, haunted search for meaning when all his plans collapse. Tonight's narrative will gently weave those scattered sources into one continuous, soothing account, so you can sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold. Before we begin, you are invited to make this a shared, quiet experience across the galaxy. Dim the lights if you can. Lie back, perhaps close your eyes, and simply listen as the Force and fate shape one Sith's tragic path. We always enjoy seeing where you're listening from, so feel free to leave a comment and share your corner of the galaxy as Darth Maul's full story unfolds. Beyond the Phantom Menace. How much of Maul's life you never saw. Tonight, Darth Maul may feel familiar. Red skin, black tattoos, the double-bladed saber igniting in a hangar on Naboo. For many people in 1999, that was almost the entire story. On screen, he arrived like a nightmare that flickered in and out of existence. A silent figure at his master's side. A few lines about revealing themselves to the Jedi. A sudden clash of blades in the desert, and then the duel of the fates in the Theed power core. He fought, he fell into darkness, and the credits rolled. As a result, whole generations simply assumed he died there, cut in half and forgotten by the galaxy. But that fall was not an ending. It was a beginning that no one watching could see. Maul did not only survive being bisected by Obi-Wan Kenobi, he endured. He clung to life through raw hatred and the Force. dragging himself into the depths of a junk world called Dathomir, where he lived for years on improvised spider legs, half creature and half memory. From that forgotten pit, he would rise again as a major power in the Clone Wars, commanding armies, criminal syndicates, and for a time, even ruling Mandalore itself from a stolen throne. To understand how that was possible, this video will move through his life in clear, steady phases. First, the stolen child of Dathomir, taken from the Night Sisters and shaped by Mother Talzin's bargains and Darth Sidious's plans. Then, the secret apprentice of Sidious, raised outside the Jedi Temple and outside the official Sith Order, honed through brutal training into a living weapon whose only purpose was to kill Jedi. From there, he becomes the Phantom of Naboo, the red shadow behind the blockade crisis, testing the Republic's defenders and announcing that the Sith had returned after hiding for 1,000 generations. When Obi-Wan cuts him down, he transforms into the broken creature on Dathomir, a mind shattered by pain and abandonment. Later, restored by his brother Savage Opress and the dark magics of Dathomir, he emerges as the warlord of the Shadow Collective, binding Black Sun, the Pikes, and Death Watch together, seizing Mandalore and reshaping the underworld. In the end, when those empires crumble, Maul becomes something smaller and sadder, a haunted seeker of meaning, drifting through the age of rebels, still chasing one last confrontation under twin suns. The reason was simple. His entire life had been built around a single failure, his inability to kill one Jedi, and he could not let it go. As we move through these stages, you do not need to hold every name, planet, or timeline in your mind. You can sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold. The narrative will return to key threads, repeat important relationships, and slow down at the moments that matter, so you can drift in and out without feeling lost in the wider galaxy. Because beneath the jewels and the crimson blades, Maul's story is not only about combat, it is about obsession, about a child raised without healthy attachment, about the quiet tragedy of someone who was never allowed to be anything except a weapon pointed at the Jedi. In the next section, we will begin where his path truly starts, on the shadowed world of Dathomir, where a mother, a Sith Lord, and the Force itself first claimed him. A weapon, not a man. High-level portrait of Darth Maul. To most beings in the wider galaxy, Darth Maul was never a person in the way a Jedi Knight or a senator was a person. He was an outline in the dark, a consequence more than a character. When his name was spoken at all, it moved in whispers through criminal dens and shadowed hyperspace lanes, attached to half-remembered sightings and sudden, precise acts of violence that left no witnesses behind. For the cartels and syndicates that brushed against him, he was a red and black phantom, a figure who appeared without escort or explanation. A crown of sharp horns, skin inked like a warning, burning yellow eyes that did not wander, did not soften, did not negotiate. When he ignited that double-bladed saber, there was no doubt about his purpose. One crimson blade was already terrifying. Two, spinning in perfect balance, made him feel less like a warrior and more like a storm that had chosen a shape. The Republic at large did not know his name when Naboo fell into crisis. They saw a trade blockade, political maneuvering, a dispute to be solved in the Senate chamber. But in the space between those official reports, Maul was already moving, tracking a single ship, hunting two Jedi across the stars with the patience of a predator that had been trained its entire life for this one moment. As a result, when he finally stepped out into the open on the Theed landing platform, It felt to the Force itself as if something buried for 1,000 generations had been allowed to surface. Later, the stories changed, but the outline remained. Survivors of the early separatist conflicts spoke of a shadow behind the droid armies, a Sith assassin whose existence the Republic refused to acknowledge. Underworld captains told quieter tales of a horned figure who would one day seize Mandalore's throne from behind a mask, ruling its streets and black markets through fear, precision, and a private network of syndicates that would one day echo in names like Crimson Dawn. He was the hidden ruler of a criminal empire, yet he still moved like a blade in someone else's hand. The reason was simple. In Darth Sidious's grand design, Maul was never meant to be a partner. He was a test, an experiment to see how effectively one perfectly honed assassin, raised outside the Jedi Temple, could destabilize an entire order without revealing the master behind him. Jedi hunter, political scalpel, proof of concept for the larger fall of the Republic. But that is only how the galaxy saw him. Beneath the patterns of ink and the disciplined hatred, there was a child taken from home, molded through brutal training into something that did not know how to be anything except a weapon. When he was cut down and discarded, that weapon was left to ask, in its own wordless way, what remains when your entire identity is built on serving a master who replaces you? So, to understand how Darth Maul could rise so high in the underworld and still fall so completely, we have to return to the place where that weapon was first forged. Not a temple, but a world of red mist and old magic, where a mother bargained with powers in the dark, and where the Sith came to claim a child whose fate would haunt the galaxy long after his first apparent death. Dathomir's red mists, the world that birthed Darth Maul. Not a temple, but a world of red mist and old magic. Not a shining city, but a planet that seemed to bleed into its own sky. Dathomir sat on the edge of the known galaxy, like a wound that never fully healed, and it was here that Darth Maul first opened his eyes. The world itself felt hostile to the unprepared. Crimson clouds drifted low over jagged mountains. Forests of twisted, bone-white trees clawed upward, their roots sunk into black, marshy soil. At night, the red mists thickened until distance disappeared, and only the sound remained. Drums in the dark, and the low rhythmic chanting of hidden covens calling on powers older than the Republic's order or the Jedi Temple. If you were to stand there and listen, you would feel the Force moving differently, heavier, more primal, as if the planet remembered every ritual ever carved into its surface. On this world, the Night Sisters ruled. They were a matriarchal society of witches, cloaked in ash and ink, who did not think of the Force as light or dark, Jedi or Sith. To them, it was green ichor, rising like smoke, the whisper of spirits, the memory of ancestors who refused to let go. They bound this power into amulets, potions, and living bodies, weaving illusion and death with equal ease. For 1,000 generations, or so their legends claimed, they had survived by standing apart from the great wars of the galaxy, answering to no senate, no council, no code. The men of Dathomir lived differently. Branded as Night Brothers, they were gathered into warrior clans, trained from childhood to fight and obey. Many bore horns and tattoos, their bodies marked as weapons to be offered when the covens required strength. Maul was almost certainly one of these children, a small, fierce Night Brother whose first lessons were pain, discipline, and submission to distant sisters who could end a life with a gesture. Above them all stood Mother Talzin, tall, robed, and painted like a living spectre. She moved through her fortress of stone and bone with measured calm. She spoke softly, but entire clans shifted when she gave an order. The reason was simple. Talzin was more than a local witch. She understood the wider currents of the Force, and she understood the Sith. The Clone Wars would later hint at a buried truth. Years before, Talzin and Darth Sidious had struck a bargain. A child, steeped in Dathomir's shadows, would be given to the Sith in exchange for power and influence. Talzin believed she would be the one raised to Sidious's side. Instead, Sidious took the child. He took Maul. As a result, Maul's life began as a transaction. To his birth mother and to Talzin, he was a piece on a board, a way to reach beyond Dathomir's red horizon. To Sidious, he was something even colder, a blade to be honed in secret, outside any temple, outside any law. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can almost trace the line from that first bargain to every choice Maul will make. A child traded away, a world of ritual and shadow left behind, and somewhere in the dark between them, a promise that this weapon would one day be drawn. The training that followed would strip him of name, tribe, and attachment, but it could never quite erase the red mists of the world that birthed him. Stolen by the Sith, Sidious chooses his hidden apprentice. Sidious did not stumble upon Maul. He was looking for something very specific. By the time his attention settled on Dathomir, he was already a rising politician from Naboo, a courteous senator-in-waiting who spoke of peace in public halls and stability in the galactic order. But beneath that mask, as a secret Sith Lord, he needed an apprentice who could exist where he himself could not, entirely in the shadows, beyond the Jedi Temple's notice. For 1,000 generations, Jedi eyes had watched the great powers of the galaxy. They monitored trade routes, senates, and starfleets. The reason was simple. The Jedi expected threats to rise in the open as armies, or tyrants, or cults. Sidious understood this, and he stepped around their gaze. His apprentice could not be a known noble, a registered Padawan, or anyone tied to the usual networks. He needed a creature of the margins, born in darkness, trained in secrecy, and unleashed only when the time was right. Dathomir offered him that opportunity. In canon and supporting material, we see hints of a bargain and the shadow of a deception. Mother Talzin believed she was entering into a partnership with this off-world stranger, a chance to extend her influence beyond the red mists. Sidious, however, saw only raw material. Whether he promised her shared power or simply misled her, the result was the same. A child was taken. Maul was removed from his brothers, from Talzin, from the Night Sister web that had begun to shape his early life. From Maul's perspective, the memory blurs into impressions. Cold starship metal, a presence in the Force like a black hole. The tall figure who spoke softly, yet carried an undercurrent of absolute command. As a child, he felt awe first, then fear, then a desperate hunger to please. Sidious told him that he had been chosen for greatness, that the Jedi were weak, that the galaxy needed strength. But every promise came with a condition. Abandon all weakness, all attachment, all trace of where he came from. Isolation became part of the training, long before the first strike landed. Maul had no peers to measure himself against, no fellow students to confide in, no family name beyond what Sidious allowed him to keep. Even that name, Maul, was more function than identity, a reminder of what he existed to do. As a result, his entire sense of self narrowed to one axis: Sidious's approval. A nod became a reward. A glance away felt like failure. This was by design. Sidious kept him off the record, far from Coruscant's official circles, and far from any Sith holocron that might suggest alternatives. No Sith lineage stories, no competing philosophies, only the voice of his master and the distant, vilified image of the Jedi as an enemy to hate. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can almost feel how small Maul's world became, even as his power grew. Soon, that small world would shrink further into pain, repetition, and relentless trials. The boy from Dathomir would be put through a forge meant to burn away everything but obedience and rage. And in the next chapter of his story, we will see what, if anything, survived that fire. Forged in pain, the brutal training of Darth Maul. The forge began in darkness, not the vast darkness of space, but the close, suffocating dark of a training chamber where a child stood alone, breathing hard, listening for death. Maul's world narrowed to the hum of a remote, the faint click of servo motors, the almost silent intake of his own breath as a blast shield slid down over his eyes. Then the sting of the first blaster bolt. Sidious did not start gently. Red energy lanced toward the blindfolded boy from shifting angles, unpredictable rhythms. One shot, then three, then a storm. Maul's hands blistered as he caught the hilt of his training saber again and again, muscles screaming as he twisted, leapt, and spun, letting the force paint the room for him in currents of danger and intent. When he failed, the bolts struck flesh. Sidious did not stop the exercise. He simply increased the intensity. Pain was the lesson. Pain was the language. The reason was simple. A Sith could not retreat from suffering the way a Jedi might seek calm in the temple. Maul was taught to lean into it, to take each burn, each fracture, as proof that he was being reforged into something worthy. When he faltered, lightning crawled across his body. When he pushed through, the lightning came anyway, offered as a reward, to remind him that power and agony would always arrive together. The scenarios grew more lethal. He fought droids with live blades on narrow platforms suspended over endless chasms, where a single misstep meant death. He was loosed against caged beasts whose roars shook the durasteel under his feet, forced to balance, to strike, to improvise while the floor shifted, tilted, or broke away beneath him. There were no safety rails, no training remotes set to stun. There was only survival or failure, and failure meant more time in the medbay before being sent back to repeat the same trial. Inside, something hard was forming. As a child, Maul had known only fragments of Dathomir, but Sidious filled the empty spaces with a different story. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi, he said, had ruled a corrupt order that allowed slavery, poverty, and chaos to spread across the galaxy. The Jedi were not people. They were a disease, a faceless, robed plague that smiled while worlds suffered. As a result, Maul's hatred never attached to a single name or face. It was a cold, unfocused blade waiting for a target. When Sidious judged him ready, the training left the private chambers and descended into the real underworld. In the lower levels of Coruscant, far beneath the Senate and the shining spires, Maul stalked through alleys choked with smoke and neon haze, hunting dangerous criminals and creatures that the authorities preferred to ignore. He killed spice dealers, gang enforcers, and escaped experiments that fed on the unwary. Each hunt reinforced the same idea. He existed to move through the dark, unseen, and end lives. There were moments, brief and disorienting, when the mask slipped, a flash of himself reflected in a rain-slick window, small and younger than he felt. A quiet second after a kill. when the body at his feet looked less like an enemy and more like a person who had been afraid. In those heartbeats, the question rose, who would he have been without this path? Sidious sensed such thoughts like a scent on the air. The response was always swift. More drills, more isolation, more lectures about destiny and the weakness of attachment. Doubt was treated as infection, burned away with cruelty and praise in equal measure, until Maul learned to crush those flickers himself. So, by the time his master finally whispered of the Jedi, not as an abstract enemy, but as a coming target, Maul was ready to listen, ready to believe that his entire life of blood and fire had been leading toward a single purpose. And in the next part of his story, we will see how that purpose is given a face, a name, and a mission that will define him forever. For now, sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold as the weapon steps out of the shadows for the first time. A secret blade in the shadows, Maul before the Phantom Menace. Maul's first steps out of the shadows do not happen on a battlefield. They happen in back rooms, loading bays, and forgotten corridors, where the light of the Republic almost never reaches. For years before the Phantom Menace, he moves through the criminal underworld like a rumor with a heartbeat. People do not see Darth Maul. They see what is left behind. His master uses him as a scalpel, not a hammer. Corrupt trade officials who threaten to expose the wrong transaction simply vanish. A black sun Vigo who grows too independent is found in pieces, his guards dead before they can even raise their blasters. In later material from the Clone Wars and the comics, we glimpse fragments of this life. Maul dismantling crime lords in hidden strongholds, cutting through mercenary bands, and erasing witnesses who have heard the name Sidious when they should have heard nothing at all. The scenes are brief. The impact is not. To the underworld, the pattern becomes clear. Someone is pruning the galaxy's darkest corners, but leaving almost no trace, no emblem, no calling card, just the precise removal of obstacles that stand in the path of a design no one can quite see. As a result, the legend of a phantom enforcer begins to spread in hushed conversations between smugglers and spice runners. They speak of a horned demon with a red blade, and then they lower their voices because surviving a sighting feels like tempting the Force itself. Even among those quietly drifting toward the separatist cause, Maul is a secret. Trade Federation officials, corrupt senators, and ambitious war profiteers meet with a kindly Naboo politician named Palpatine, or with the hooded Darth Sidious, and believe they are seeing the full shape of their ally. They are not. The reason was simple. The rule of two is still being maneuvered into place, and Sidious will not reveal his true apprentice until the moment it serves the grand design. Maul is a contingency, a hidden blade reserved for the Jedi, not for frightened bureaucrats. Inside that secrecy, Maul's mind hardens. His life is a cycle of training, mission, and report. There is no temple, no family, no attachment beyond the absolute loyalty he gives to Sidious. He meditates on the coming Great War his master promises, imagining Jedi falling before him, convinced that only when he helps end the order that ruled for 1,000 generations will he finally prove if he was not just stolen as a child to be discarded. Every assignment is a rehearsal. Every kill is practice for the one hunt that matters. So these quiet years become a long, controlled inhale before the scream. Sidious has mapped the Republic's blind spots, tested the Jedi's complacency, and sharpened his assassin in real blood. And then, when the board is ready, the first open move is made on a small, seemingly unimportant world. The name is Naboo, And for Maul, it will be the moment when all those hidden stories step into the light. For now, sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold as the Phantom Enforcer is finally unleashed on the stage of galactic history. Tracking the Jedi, Maul enters the Naboo crisis. The blockade of Naboo begins like a distant storm to most of the galaxy. Trade routes, tariffs, a dispute in the Senate. But for Maul, it is something very different. It is the first time his master's grand design steps out of the shadows, and the first time his own existence will brush openly against the Jedi Order he has been shaped to destroy. On Coruscant and in the halls of power, Sidious appears as a calm political advisor. With Maul, the mask drops. The reason was simple. Maul is not meant to persuade. He is meant to end conversations with a blade. As the Trade Federation tightens its hold around Naboo, Maul watches from the edge of the holoprojector's blue light, listening as his master issues quiet commands that bend viceroys through fear. When two unexpected Jedi are dispatched to negotiate, he does not see diplomats. He sees prey that finally, after years of brutal training, has wandered into the open. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi have been taught to sense disturbance in the Force. Maul has been taught to be that disturbance. He feels them first as distant presences, then as names. Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The blockade fails to kill them. The Queen escapes. The game shifts to a remote desert world that Maul has never cared to know. Tatooine. He descends to the sands like a hunting animal released from its cage. There is no subtlety now. His speeder cuts across the dunes, cloak whipping behind him, probe droids already narrowing the search. When he finds Qui-Gon escorting a small group toward the Queen's ship, the moment is almost sacred to him. This is the enemy his nightmares have rehearsed. This is what all the pain was for. Their first clash is brief, but it tells Maul everything. Qui-Gon's green blade meets his double-bladed staff in an explosion of color against the pale sand. The Jedi is fast, controlled. Maul is faster, driven by a lifetime of honed hatred. Each strike is a question. Was his training enough? Each parry is its answer. For a few fierce seconds, the galaxy narrows to two warriors, and the Force binding them in violent opposition. And then the ship's ramp closes. Qui-Gon escapes with the Queen, and with a child who radiates raw power. Maul's sabers cut only air. Exhilaration curdles into frustration, not at himself, but at the unfinished kill. As a result, his obsession sharpens. He has tasted the reality of a Jedi in combat and found it intoxicating. Now he wants the conclusion his master promised him. Sidious senses this and uses it. Maul is dispatched to Naboo, not merely as an enforcer, but as a final correction. Capture the Queen. Eliminate the Jedi. Ensure that this minor crisis cements the rise of a future emperor. When he steps into the Theed hangar, flanked by battle droids and humming engines, Maul is calm. The hunt has come full circle. What follows in the power generator complex will be remembered simply as a duel. But beneath the walkways and the chanting chorus, the Force is arranging something far stranger. A moment that will decide not just the fate of Naboo, but the secret path of Maul's entire life. He walks toward it without hesitation, unaware that in trying to end one Jedi, he is about to begin the longest, darkest chapter of his own story. Duel of the Fates. Maul's first fall. He steps into the generator complex like a blade being drawn from its sheath. Red doors, humming walkways. Bottomless shafts of light and shadow. On the surface, it is simply a battlefield. But for Maul, It is the temple in which he will finally offer the sacrifice his master has demanded for 1,000 generations. The duel begins with motion more than with words. Maul ignites one end of his saber, then the other, the double blade spinning into a crimson wheel. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan advance together. Their green and blue blades meet his in a flurry of strikes, the Force turning each impact into a ringing note that echoes through the chamber. Maul moves low and fast, using acrobatics not as showmanship, but as a calculated style drilled into him through years of brutal training. Every leap, every kick, every pivot is meant to break their rhythm. Under Jedi tradition, 2 against 1 should favor the order. But Maul has studied this. The reason was simple. Divide, then overwhelm. He drives them along the catwalks, using the length of his saber to threaten both at once, then angling his attack so that Obi-Wan is forced back, step by step. A well-placed kick sends the Padawan over the edge of a narrow platform, clinging for his life. In that instant, the balance shifts. Maul has what he wanted, the Master isolated. Inside, as he presses Qui-Gon back into the reactor core chamber, Maul feels something close to serenity. This is the moment Sidious promised him as a child stolen from Dathomir. Each strike is a proof. Each parry is a whispered answer to the question that has haunted his entire existence. Was he truly the perfect Sith weapon? When his saber finally finds the opening, driving through Qui-Gon's chest, there is no hesitation. There is only cold satisfaction and the fierce, quiet belief that he has fulfilled his purpose. Obi-Wan's scream breaks that stillness, but Maul hears it as confirmation, not warning. He paces behind the energy barrier, a predator walking the edge of its cage, eyes fixed on the grieving Padawan. When the shields drop, he assaults Obi-Wan with renewed ferocity, driving him back, disarming him, casting him into the shaft with a contemptuous push. In his mind, the story is over. The Jedi are broken. He has won. That is when overconfidence becomes a wound he cannot see. Hanging in the void, Obi-Wan reaches not for anger, but for the living Force, for his attachment to his fallen master. In one desperate, disciplined motion, he rises. The leap is clean. The draw of Qui-Gon's saber is instinct. The cut is final. Maul has a heartbeat to understand. Then his world becomes falling, fire, and the shock of being cut in half. His body tumbles into the reactor shaft, but something deeper is severed. The identity built on Sidious promises. As a result, the galaxy believes Darth Maul is dead. Sidious turns to other apprentices. Most viewers let the credits roll and move on. But if you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you will find that Maul's fall on Naboo is not an ending at all. It is the doorway to a far darker descent, where survival itself becomes another kind of prison. Surviving the impossible. Hatred as a lifeline. For years, that fall on Naboo seemed final. A clean, brutal end to a Sith assassin whose story the films barely began to tell. But in the wider tapestry of Star Wars, death is not always where the camera cuts away. Fans ask the same quiet question again and again. How could anyone survive being cut in half and dropped into a reactor shaft? The reason was simple on the surface. He should not have. Yet the Clone Wars, creator commentary, and later reference material slowly turned that impossible moment into the beginning of another, darker chapter. They did not erase the wound. They explained how a mind like Maul's could refuse to let go. From Maul's perspective, the fall is not cinematic. It is confusion first, then pain, then something even narrower, One instant, he is pressing Obi-Wan back, certain of victory. The next, blue light flashes, his body opens, and the world breaks into two pieces with him. Gravity takes hold. The temple walls blur past. Nerves scream and then go strangely distant, as if the body is already trying to die. Here, his world shrinks. There is no Sith order, no grand plan for the galaxy. There is only Obi-Wan Kenobi's face, lit by a Jedi's calm that Maul has always hated and never understood. The shock becomes terror. The terror hardens into a single burning point of hatred. He does not beg the Force for mercy. He reaches for it like a weapon and clings to one thought. I will not die by this Jedi's hand. In Star Wars lore, the dark side feeds on obsession. It corrodes, but it also sustains. Sith alchemy, unnatural experiments, and sheer will have kept other beings alive long past what their bodies should allow. Maul is not performing a ritual as he falls. He is something simpler and more terrible, a will that refuses to release its rage. As a result, the Force becomes less a flowing current and more a knot around him, a tether made of spite. His bisected body does not vanish into energy. It is caught in the machinery beneath Theed, dragged away by automated systems, and eventually claimed by refuse haulers. Piece by piece, load by load, what remains of Darth Maul is carried across the stars and discarded on the junk world of Lotho Minor, a place where forgotten things go to rust in the dark. On Lotho Minor, time loses meaning. Maul's flesh decays and twists. His lower half is replaced by frantic animal constructions of scrap, until he scuttles through the refuse like a spider that only remembers pain. He mutters Obi-Wan's name until language itself frays. If you listen to this part of the story, you can almost hear how thin that thread of consciousness becomes. From this point on, Maul is no longer merely Sidious's hidden weapon. Sidious has moved on, training new apprentices, reshaping the galaxy without a second thought for the child he once forged. Maul survives anyway. He survives as a broken creature whose only remaining purpose is revenge, a fragment of will clinging to life long after everyone, including his master, has forgotten he exists. And somewhere in that forgotten darkness, the Force is not finished with him yet. Lotho Minor, a spider in the dark. Lotho Minor is not a world so much as a wound in the galaxy. It drifts under a sky choked with ash and chemical fog, its surface buried beneath endless mountains of scrap, leaking fuel and broken machines. Everything here is discarded, forgotten, left to rust in the dark. In that sense, it is the perfect mirror for Maul himself, a weapon thrown away once it had served its purpose. The landscape is a graveyard of starships and droids. Hulls lie split open like carcasses, wiring hangs like entrails, and toxic rivers glow faintly between twisted metal canyons. Nothing grows, nothing truly lives. And somewhere deep within this artificial labyrinth, a half-destroyed Sith apprentice claws his way back from the edge of death, driven by a single thought that will not let him go. Maul's survival is not graceful. It is ugly, improvised, almost animal. With his lower body gone, he drags himself through the wreckage until he finds droid torsos, shattered walker frames, abandoned manipulators. Piece by piece, he assembles a grotesque set of spider-like legs, a tangle of metal and cable that lifts his ruined torso and lets him move again. The result is monstrous. It does not resemble a man. It barely resembles a droid. He crawls through narrow tunnels carved by industrial runoff, clinging to corroded walls, hunting vermin and scavenger creatures for food. Sometimes he feeds on the scraps of other scavengers, fighting them off with wild, unfocused rage. The Force is still there, flickering through him, but it is buried under layers of instinct and pain. As a result, Maul becomes more beast than warrior, a predator haunting a junkyard underworld. His mind fractures under the strain. Memories of the temple on Coruscant blur with the training chambers of Sidious's hidden lairs, and both dissolve into the endless maze of Dathomir. He mutters the same names again and again, but one rises above all others: Obi-Wan. The reason was simple. That name is the hinge on which his entire story turned. He repeats it as a curse, as a plea, as an anchor. In the rhythm of that name, he remembers who failed him and who he must destroy. Over the years, Maul's thoughts spiral into obsessive patterns. He recites fragments of Sith code. He drills invisible opponents in the dark. He speaks to shadows as if they were Jedi, as if they were Sidious, as if they were the child he once was on Dathomir, before the Sith Order claimed him. Occasionally, a glimmer of tactical clarity cuts through the madness, only to be swallowed again by static and fear. In this broken state, he even finds a kind of companion. A snake-like scavenger slithers through his lair, drawn by scraps and by the strange presence of this half-metal creature. Maul talks to it in rambling monologues, explaining strategies, recounting battles, insisting that he was meant for more than this. His voice still carries the cadence of a trained assassin, but the content is disjointed, as if his formal Sith training survived while most of his memories did not. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can almost hear the echo of the warrior he once was beneath the ravings. The Force has not abandoned him. It coils quietly around his hatred, keeping him alive, keeping him waiting. For 1,000 generations, the galaxy has buried its ghosts in places like this, assuming they will never rise again. But Maul is not finished. Far away, on another world steeped in shadow, Mother Talzin feels the pull of her lost son. Blood calls to blood. Designs long delayed begin to move again, and somewhere in the swirling fumes above Dathomir, fate bends as someone follows that call down into the dark, toward the spider that remembers only one name. Savage Opress, the brother who finds what the galaxy forgot. The presence that answers that call is not a Jedi, and not a Sith in the formal sense of the Order. It is a Night Brother, born in the shadows of Dathomir, where the air itself seems thick with old spells and older grudges. His name is Savage Opress. Among the males of Dathomir, strength meant survival. Savage began as one more warrior in the Night Brother village, loyal, brutal when he had to be, but not yet the monster the galaxy would come to fear. That change came when Mother Talzin and the Night Sisters chose him as a tool. Through their dark rituals, they drowned him in ichor and whispered commands into his mind. His muscles swelled, his horns lengthened, his will was bound. The reason was simple. Talzin needed a champion to strike at Count Dooku, and Savage would be that living weapon. Under their guidance, he was sent into the wider galaxy as a blunt instrument. He trained briefly under Dooku, then turned on him at Talzin's signal, lashing out at the separatist leader and his forces. Battles followed, full of rage and confusion. Savage killed Jedi, shattered clone ranks, and left wreckage behind him. But he never truly understood the deeper game. He was a pawn on a board drawn by others, moved by currents of the Force he could feel but not name. When that first campaign faltered, Talzin did not discard him. Instead, she revealed the hidden layer beneath all of it. Savage, she said, was not alone. Somewhere in the cold dark between stars, a brother still lived. A child once taken from Dathomir, molded by another master, and cast aside, Maul. She had felt his survival like a distant wound, pulsing through the dark side for 1,000 generations of Dathomiri tradition. And now she intended to reclaim what the galaxy had forgotten. To do this, she armed Savage not with an army, but with talismans and visions. Green smoke curled around him, showing fragments of a junk world, twisted metal, and a broken mind. Dathomir. He followed those images across hyperspace, descending into a planet-wide graveyard where droids, ships, and failed dreams went to rust. The landscape itself felt like Maul's thoughts, scattered, sharp-edged, and dangerous to touch. Savage pushed deeper into that labyrinth, guided by the pull of blood and the faint echo of shared pain. He fought off scavengers, navigated collapsing scrap towers, and moved through tunnels lit only by flickering, dying lights. Each step seemed to draw him closer to something wrong, something powerful, something that did not want to be found. You can almost sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold in your mind as you picture that slow descent, each sound amplified by the knowledge that a forgotten Sith waited somewhere below. When he finally reached the heart of that maze, he did not find the graceful assassin the galaxy remembered. He found a spider. Maul's upper body, pale and gaunt, was fused to a mass of improvised metal legs, welded from junk and desperation. His horns were overgrown, his eyes wild, his voice a broken chain of mutters and screams. Yet in that chaos, one word returned again and again: Kenobi. The name circled his thoughts like a star he could not escape. Savage stared at the creature before him and saw, beneath the madness, something familiar in the eyes. The same yellow-red glow. The same buried fear and attachment, twisted into hatred. Maul did not recognize him as a brother at first. He raved about the Jedi, about the moment on Naboo, about being cut in half and left to fall. But as a result of Savage's presence, the bond of blood began to tug at Maul's shattered mind, drawing fragments of identity back together. This first meeting is eerie and deeply tragic. One brother stands whole, yet enslaved by magic and orders he never chose. The other is physically broken, yet kept alive by a will so strong it defied death itself. In that cramped, stinking nest of scrap, they form a new axis of power. Savage lifts Maul from the wreckage, cradling the spider-legged form with a care that feels almost out of place in such a nightmare. Together, they leave Dathomir behind. Their destination is not a Jedi temple or a Sith fortress, but the red forests of Dathomir, where Mother Talzin waits. There, she will attempt something the galaxy rarely sees. Not just the rebuilding of a body, but the careful stitching of a mind torn apart by loss, rage, and years of isolation. If you wish to understand how deep Maul's story truly goes, we highly recommend exploring what happens when that mind finally clears and turns outward once more. Reforged by witchcraft, Talzin restores Maul. Talzin does not greet him with comfort. She greets him with ritual. In the heart of Dathomir, beneath twisted trees and a sky stained red, the Night Sisters prepare a chamber that feels older than the Jedi Temple itself. Stone slabs form a crude circle. Ancient symbols are carved into the floor, each line darkened by time and sacrifice. Green mist seeps from cracks in the rock. It coils around broken pillars and drifts like slow-moving fire across the ground. At the center, they lay Maul's twisted, spider-like form, a tangle of metal and madness dragged back from the edge of the galaxy. The chanting begins as a low murmur. Then it grows, layer by layer, until the air vibrates with a sound that feels like the dark side given voice. Mother Talzin steps forward. For 1,000 generations, Night Sister magic has worked in the shadows, parallel to the great currents of the Force, but never fully embraced by Jedi or Sith. Here, that hidden current gathers around Maul. Talzin's hands rise, and the green mist answers, wrapping his shattered torso, probing the crude legs he built in desperation on Lotho Minor. Metal groans, bolts snap and fall away. The spider limbs twist, melt, and reform under her will. Where there was a monstrous tangle, new cybernetic legs take shape. More balanced, more human, yet still sharp-edged and predatory. The reason was simple. Talzin is not interested in healing for its own sake. She is reforging a weapon. As a result, Maul stands again in a vaguely humanoid silhouette, but every joint, every plate of armor, still whispers of suffering and survival. Yet the body is the easier task. The mind is where the true ritual lies. Maul's thoughts are a storm of fragmented images. Naboo's energy fields, the flash of a blue blade, the instant of falling. Talzin reaches into that storm. Green light spills from her fingers to his temples, and memory after memory is dragged to the surface, forcing him to relive the training pits, Sidious's cold approval, and the endless command to hate the Jedi. Piece by piece, she stitches him back together. She gives shape to his rage, focuses his fear, and reminds him of the name he once carried with pride. Darth Maul, chosen apprentice of Sidious. Identity returns, but it does not return unchanged. He remembers being discarded. He remembers the years alone, treated as nothing more than refuse by a galaxy that had moved on. So when his eyes finally clear, there is a new distance in them. He is still a creature of the Sith Order, but no longer a blindly obedient enforcer. The hatred that once flowed outward in all directions now narrows to a single point. Talzin asks what he desires. The chamber falls silent. The Night Sisters watch. Maul breathes, steady now, balanced on his new legs. One word leaves his lips, calm and chilling. Kenobi, not shouted, not raved, spoken with full awareness, as a vow. He does not speak of serving Sidious or of grand designs for the galaxy. He speaks only of making Obi-Wan suffer as he has suffered. And in that moment, as you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, Maul's path bends toward a future that will drag countless others into his private war, including someone he has not yet met, but whose destiny is already tied to his next move. A new purpose, from Sidious's weapon to self-made warlord. From that vow of vengeance, something subtle begins to shift inside him. Maul has been a weapon since he was a child, taken from Dathomir and shaped in secret by Darth Sidious. His life narrowed to a single command: kill the Jedi. Now, after surviving the impossible and being rebuilt by Night Sister magic, he looks back on that life and sees not purpose, but betrayal. He was discarded, not just by Obi-Wan, who cut him in half and left him to fall, but by the entire Sith Order that never came searching the way a Jedi might have scoured a temple for a fallen Padawan. The reason was simple. To Sidious, Maul was always replaceable, a stepping stone to a grander apprentice. As a result, Maul's hatred widens. It is no longer the focused blade of an obedient assassin. It becomes a storm aimed at Jedi and Sith alike. In his early conversations with Savage Opress, you can hear that new vision forming. Savage expects orders, names to kill, planets to burn. Instead, Maul speaks of power, of building something that will make the galaxy itself tremble. He explains that fear is a resource, just like credits or soldiers, and that if they can become the source of that fear, others will gather around them, not as masters and slaves, but as tools in a larger design. Under Sidious, Maul's training emphasized speed, precision, and obedience. Strike, vanish, obey. Now he begins to show the mind that training had hidden. He understands that brute force alone cannot reshape the galaxy. To truly matter again, he must control trade routes and safe havens, information networks and symbols of legitimacy, Mandalorian armor, Hutt shipping lanes. Even whispered legends in the underworld taverns become pieces on his board. So he looks to the shadows between the great powers. Armies are watched, fleets are tracked, but criminal syndicates and cartels move where no Senate report ever reaches, slipping between Republic patrols and separatist blockades with equal ease. If Maul can bend Black Sun, the Pikes, and other syndicates to his will, he can strike anywhere, at any time, while the Jedi debate in their council chamber and the Sith scheme from the safety of Coruscant. This is the pattern interrupt in his own story. The silent assassin becomes a self-made warlord. He is no longer content to be a hidden blade in Sidious's hand. He wants an empire of his own, a dark mirror to the Republic and the Sith alike, built on fear, profit, and carefully managed chaos. And yet, beneath all of that strategy, one name still burns: Obi-Wan. Maul decides that his first step toward this new empire will not be a throne world or a fortress, but a message. He will draw Kenobi out by threatening the innocent, recreating the terror and helplessness he felt on Naboo and in the depths of Lotho Minor. As you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, his plan becomes clear. Use the suffering of others as bait, turn attachment into a weapon, and let a single Jedi's pain announce the return of Darth Maul to the entire galaxy. From here, his path will move from whispered deals in the underworld to open war on worlds that, for 1,000 generations, never imagined a fallen Sith would choose them as the stage for his revenge. Luring the Jedi, Maul's first revenge on Obi-Wan. Maul's return to the wider galaxy does not begin with a duel. It begins with a pattern of quiet horrors on forgotten worlds. Small colonies on the Outer Rim report massacres with no clear military objective. Villages are burned, families slaughtered, and yet no territory is taken, no bases are claimed. The reason was simple. This was bait. Maul and savage Opress move from system to system like a storm with no banner. They cut down civilians, taunt local authorities, and leave survivors only to spread the story. Each attack is chosen with care, just visible enough that the Jedi Council cannot ignore it, but far enough from the core that responses will be thin and delayed. Maul understands the Order's sense of duty. He understands how the Temple will feel the pull of these cries for help. Most of all, he understands one Jedi. He knows that somewhere in those halls, Obi-Wan Kenobi will listen to the reports and feel a familiar chill of fear and responsibility. A nameless Sith assassin, once thought dead, is now orchestrating suffering on a scale designed to echo Naboo. So when Kenobi volunteers to investigate one of these attacks, Maul's trap finally closes. On a desolate world, the two meet again. Obi-Wan steps from his ship, expecting a warlord or a pirate king. Instead, a cloaked figure ignites a red blade, and the voice that greets him is full of venom and recognition. When Maul reveals himself, there is a moment where time seems to slow. Obi-Wan sees the face of the Sith he cut in half, the enemy he believed lost to the void. Shock hits first, then guilt. Kenobi has trained for years to release attachment, to accept that even enemies fall to the will of the Force. Yet here stands living proof that his victory on Naboo birthed something worse. Maul feels that hesitation and presses the wound, speaking of pain, of years of madness, of a life rebuilt around one name. As a result, every strike of Maul's saber is an accusation. You did this to me. Their conflict only deepens when Maul seizes Mandalore and captures Duchess Satine cries. Obi-Wan's quiet, long-buried love. In front of Kenobi, Maul drives his blade through her, cradling the moment like a dark reflection of his own loss. He wants Obi-Wan to break, to scream, to fall. He wants to prove that even the most disciplined Jedi can be dragged down by attachment. But Obi-Wan does not shatter. He grieves. He bends, but he will not kill in hatred. That calm, that refusal to surrender fully to rage, infuriates Maul more than any defeat. It tells him that his story of pain is not enough to rewrite the light in this one man. These clashes are only the beginning. As Maul learns how far Obi-Wan will not fall, his vision widens. Revenge remains the core. But now he looks beyond one Jedi, towards syndicates, thrones, and a shadow empire that might one day challenge both the Republic and the Sith who once owned him. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you will see his vendetta stretch from these first ambushes to wars that shake worlds that, for 1,000 generations, believed themselves safe from a single broken survivor of Naboo. Building the Shadow Collective, Maul's criminal empire. Maul's answer to being discarded by the Sith is not to retreat into hiding. It is to build something the Jedi and the Republic have never truly understood. A united underworld, shaped by his will, in the dark spaces between worlds. He begins to weave together a new kind of order, one that will come to be known as the Shadow Collective. On paper, it is simple. Take the most powerful syndicates in the galaxy and bind them into one alliance. In practice, it requires the same patience and precision he once used as an assassin, now turned toward politics and fear instead of single strikes. The reason was simple. If Maul could not yet challenge Sidious or the Jedi Temple directly, he would first seize the arteries of trade, spice, and violence that fed both sides of the war. He starts with Black Sun. Their fortress on Mustafar is a statement in itself, a palace of lava and durasteel, where crime lords imagine themselves untouchable. Maul and savage Opress arrive as guests, but they move like executioners. When the Faline leaders refuse to bend, Maul does not negotiate. He and Savage cut them down in a brief, brutal display, leaving their bodies as a lesson. New, more compliant Vigo rulers are installed on the spot, their loyalty secured not by attachment or ideology, but by the immediate memory of what defiance costs. From there, Maul turns to the Pike Syndicate. The Pikes care about spice, profit, and survival. Maul offers all three: protection from Jedi interference, new routes opened by his tactical mind, and a share in something larger than any single cartel. Where Black Sun needed a massacre, the Pikes accept a bargain. As a result, another major pillar of the underworld falls quietly into his shadow. These early moves reveal how far he has grown from the silent blade of the Phantom Menace. He still trusts the Force, his speed, his rage, but now he speaks in terms of percentages, convoys, and political leverage. He understands that for 1,000 generations, the Jedi and the Senate have ignored what happens in the cracks of civilization. He intends to rule those cracks and then use them to break open entire worlds. The final, crucial piece is not a syndicate at all, but a shattered warrior culture, Deathwatch, led by Pre Vizsla, dreams of restoring Mandalore's ancient martial glory. Vizsla sees Maul as a weapon to point at his pacifist enemies. Maul presents himself as exactly that, a partner, a fellow enemy of the Republic, a blade to be wielded. In private, however, he studies Vizsla, measures Deathwatch's factions, and quietly positions himself to take command when the time is right. What begins as alliance is, in Maul's mind, already conquest. The Shadow Collective is more than a criminal empire. It is the scaffolding for something bolder. All of this maneuvering, every fallen Vigo and whispered deal, is aimed at a single prize, Mandalore itself. And when Maul finally moves on that world, the war will feel his return in a way neither Jedi nor Sith are prepared to face. Taking Mandalore, from shadow to throne. Mandalore was the perfect target because it looked stable. It was officially neutral in the Clone Wars, a proud world that refused to join either the Republic or the Separatists. But beneath Duchess Satine, Kryze's calm, pacifist government, the old warrior culture simmered like a dormant volcano. For 1,000 generations, Mandalorians had defined themselves through battle. Satine's new Mandalorians tried to replace armor with politics, the blade with negotiation. Many citizens welcomed peace. Many others felt their identity slipping away. The reason was simple. You cannot rewrite a people's entire history in one generation without awakening fear, resentment, and nostalgia for the old ways. Maul saw that fracture line immediately. He did not attack Mandalore head-on. Instead, he offered Deathwatch exactly what they craved: a path to restore the ancient warrior order and overthrow Satine. Pre Vizsla, bearing the legendary Darksaber, believed he would ride that wave of unrest to the throne. Maul simply nodded and let him think so. Together, they crafted a quiet, cruel plan. The Shadow Collective would unleash chaos across Mandalore's cities. Black Sun enforcers, Pike syndicates, even Maul's own forces staging bombings, kidnappings, and street battles. Deathwatch would then arrive in gleaming armor, driving the criminals away, rescuing hostages, and parading their victories in front of the holocrons. As a result, the public would see Satina's pacifist security as weak and Deathwatch as necessary protectors. This was not a single battle. It was a performance. Each attack was calibrated to deepen the people's fear. Each rescue was staged to showcase Vizsla as a decisive traditional leader. You can almost imagine living there, watching the news, seeing the same blue armor appear every time the force of law failed. Little by little, attachment to Satine's idealism eroded. When the coup finally came, it felt, to many Mandalorians, like a correction rather than a revolution. Deathwatch seized key facilities, arrested Satine, and installed a familiar face, Prime Minister Olmec, as a pliable figurehead. Vizsla stood in public as the savior of Mandalore, armor shining, Darksaber ignited, while Maul remained in the shadows, content to let another man take the stage. Then the pattern broke. In private, Vizsla tried to discard his Sith ally, declaring Maul a criminal to be imprisoned. That was Maul's pattern: interrupt. He refused to be a tool. Before the gathered warriors, he invoked Mandalorian tradition and challenged Vizsla to single combat for leadership. The duel was brutal and intimate. Jetpacks roared, blades clashed, and ancient training met Sith discipline. In the end, Maul disarmed Vizsla, beheaded him, and claimed the Darksaber. By Mandalorian custom, that made him ruler. The image that followed is one of the strangest in the story of the galaxy. Darth Maul, once a hidden assassin, cut down by a Jedi child. now seated on the throne of Mandalore, dark saber in hand, commanding both criminals and warriors. His empire had never been stronger, and somewhere far away, in the dark halls of another temple, his former master finally turned his gaze toward his lost apprentice. Sidious returns. The master punishes his wayward apprentice. Sidious does not arrive on Mandalore with an army. He does not need one. The former master comes alone, a small shuttle cutting through Mandalorian skies toward a world that has no idea what is truly descending upon it. When he steps into the city, he moves with unhurried grace. There is no visible anger, no raised voice, just that faint, almost amused smile as Maul's loyalists rush to confront the intruder. Blaster fire erupts, Mandalorian armor advances, and Sidious walks forward as if strolling through a temple courtyard. With a casual flick of the wrist, he sends guards crashing into walls. Red blades ignite, carving through armored warriors who, moments ago, believed they served the most dangerous Sith in the galaxy. For 1,000 generations, the Sith had dreamed of this kind of power in secret. In Sidious, that dream has become something cold and effortless. Maul senses it before he sees him. The Force twists, dark and familiar, and the child inside the warrior, stolen from Dathomir, shaped by endless training, recognizes his maker. The reunion is not warm. Maul and savage Opress confront Sidious together, twin crimson blades against the Emperor's humming sabers. Under Sith tradition, 2 against 1 should be overwhelming. The reason was simple. Combined strength, combined hatred. But Sidious turns that logic into a lesson. He laughs softly as they attack. He yields ground, then takes it back, driving them through Mandalorian halls Maul had claimed as his own throne. Each exchange reveals the gulf between them. Savage fights like a hammer, powerful but imprecise. Maul is faster, more disciplined, his movements echoing the brutal drills of his youth. Yet Sidious is playing a different game. He flows around their strikes, turning parries into punishment, hurling them apart with arcs of crackling lightning that remind you just how far the Sith have come from the old Jedi Order. When he chooses to end savage, it happens almost gently. A feint, a twist, and twin blades slide through the Night Brother's chest. Savage's strength drains away, his mutated form shrinking back toward the frightened being he once was. Maul catches him, calling his name with a desperation we rarely hear from him. In Savage's fading eyes, Maul sees the only true attachment he has allowed himself since being torn from Mother Talzin and Dathomir. As a result, this death cuts deeper than any Jedi strike. Sidious watches, patient as Maul begs. There is no mercy, only curiosity. Then the storm falls on Maul alone. Lightning tears through him. Sabers beat his defenses down. He is thrown, disarmed, pinned beneath the weight of a master he once thought he might surpass. And still, Sidious does not kill him. Instead, he leans close and promises that he has other uses for his wayward apprentice. In that moment, Maul understands. In his master's eyes, he has never been more than a tool, a piece on a far larger board between Sidious and Talzin. The throne of Mandalore fades behind him. Chains replace the darksaber. His brief empire collapses as he is dragged away, not as a conqueror, but as cargo. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, this is where Maul's rise ends, and where a darker, quieter chapter begins, as he becomes a captive in a shadow war he cannot yet see. Pawns of greater powers. Maul between Sidious and Talzin. Maul's chains are not just metal. They are a design. They are a signal. To the outside galaxy, he is a forgotten prisoner in the shadows of the Separatist war. But to Darth Sidious, he is bait carefully placed on the board. The reason was simple. Mother Talzin still lived, still whispered through the dark side, and Sidious could not allow a rival power to grow alongside his coming empire. For 1,000 generations, the Sith had torn themselves apart with rivalries and hidden cults. Sidious meant to end that. Talzin was not merely a witch on Dathomir. She was once a near equal, a practitioner who had bargained with him over children and futures, who had her own designs on the galaxy. Maul was the shared wound between them. As long as Maul existed, Talzin had something to protect, and Sidious had something to exploit. So Maul is kept alive, moved from cell to cell, bound in fields that smother the Force. He is questioned, tormented, reminded that Mandalore has fallen, and that his shadow collective lies in ruins. Yet the embers of his influence remain. Loyal Mandalorians, former Death Watch warriors, and scattered lieutenants from Black Sun and the Pikes refuse to accept that their Dark Master is gone. Quietly, they track rumors of a horned prisoner. Quietly, they plan. When the rescue finally comes, it is swift and violent. Maul is pulled from his confinement by armored Mandalorians who still see him as the rightful ruler of Mandalore, as the weapon who broke Pre Vizsla and humbled Jedi in their own temple corridors. As a result, the galaxy learns that his fall was not complete. The Shadow Collective is fractured, but not dead. Its remnants carry him back to the one place where his story began to twist away from Sidious, Dathomir. There, among the green mists and the bones of the Night Sisters, Mother Talzin answers. She manifests through ritual and ichor, half spirit and half mother, drawing Maul into a fortress of spells and old attachments. She seeks to shield him, to restore what Sidious tried to unmake, and perhaps to reclaim the child that was taken from her for Sith training. But their enemies move faster. Sidious does not come alone. He brings Count Dooku, already ensnared in Talzin's magic, and General Grievous with his army of droids. The assault on Dathomir is not a duel. It is an execution of a rival tradition. Blaster fire tears through crumbling stone, while Talzin and Sidious hurl the Force at one another in raw, unnatural waves. Dooku writhes as her power uses his body as a vessel. Grievous cuts down Night Sister phantoms with cold efficiency. In the end, Talzin chooses to stand between Maul and Sidious's wrath, fully manifesting, fully vulnerable. She dies under Grievous's blades, her magic dispersing into fading mist, while Maul is dragged away to safety by his remaining followers. Once again, someone close to Maul is destroyed, not because of his own choices alone, but because Sidious is playing a larger game. Savage, the Night Sisters, now Talzin herself, each loss reinforces the same lesson. He was never a partner. He was a piece to be moved, sacrificed, or reclaimed. After Dathomir, Maul's ambitions begin to contract. His dreams of ruling Mandalore, of replacing the Jedi Order with his own dark dominion, give way to something narrower and more desperate. The Clone Wars are burning toward their end. A new apprentice waits in the wings, a chosen enforcer who will soon stride through the temple as it falls. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, Maul's path from here becomes less about conquest and more about one final obsession that the coming Darth Vader will unknowingly eclipse. The Shadow Collective fractures. Maul in the final days of the Clone Wars. From this point on, Maul's empire does not truly grow. It decays. The Shadow Collective that once seemed to stretch across half the underworld begins to show cracks, and those cracks widen under the constant pressure of a galaxy at war. The reason was simple. Maul had built his power on fear, opportunity, and distraction, and all three were starting to shift. Republic forces, emboldened by scattered victories, push harder against the crime syndicates that openly support separatist efforts. At the same time, Dooku and the Confederacy see Maul as an unpredictable rival, not an ally. As a result, some syndicates decide that survival matters more than loyalty. Black Sun leaders are assassinated or replaced. The Pikes pull resources back to their spice routes. Others are quietly absorbed by larger powers that promise protection from both Jedi and Sith. Inside the collective, mistrust grows. These are not soldiers raised in a temple or an order. They are smugglers, mercenaries, and warlords who joined Maul when his rise looked unstoppable. Now, with Sidious having personally humiliated him and taken savage Opress, whispers spread that Maul's protection is an illusion. A few bold captains defect to the separatists. Others simply vanish into the Outer Rim, taking ships and credits with them. To keep anything stable, Maul tightens his grip on Mandalore. The world he took through blood and ritual combat becomes the core of his shrinking domain. He rules from the shadows, using Prime Minister Olmec as a public mask, while warriors like Gar Saxon enforce his will. On the surface, Mandalore appears neutral. In truth, its throne room is a dark mirror of the Jedi Council chamber, a place where every decision bends toward control and vengeance. This cannot last. Bo-Katan cries, and her night owls refuse to accept an outsider, much less a former Sith assassin on Mandalore's throne. They reach out, quietly, to the Republic. Senators listen, generals listen, and in the Force, the Jedi sense that Mandalore, long a symbol of warrior pride, is becoming another fault line in a war that already stretches their training and their ideals to the breaking point. Maul feels that same tremor. For 1,000 generations, Sith have waited for a single moment of collapse, and from the outside, he can taste that moment drawing near. Visions, half-formed and jagged, show him Jedi temples in flames, clone armies turning, a new enforcer standing where he once dreamed of standing. He studies Sidious's moves from afar, trying to read the hidden design he was never fully taught. Here, a quiet shift occurs. Earlier, Maul had moved first. He had seized worlds, forged alliances, forced the galaxy to react. Now he finds himself answering blows instead of throwing them. He scrambles to plug gaps in his defenses, to replace lost captains, to guess which Republic task force or separatist trap will come for him next. He is powerful, but he is no longer setting the terms. So, by the time the Republic finally prepares to intervene on Mandalore, Maul is already standing in the eye of a storm he did not summon. The Shadow Collective is fractured. His allies are narrowed to fanatics, paid killers, and a handful of truly loyal followers. And waiting on the horizon is a different kind of opponent. Not a council master, not a Sith Lord, but a former Padawan whose exile, disillusionment, and broken attachment to the Jedi Order reflect Maul's own in unexpected ways. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, the siege of Mandalore becomes more than a military campaign. It becomes the meeting of two wounded apprentices, Maul and Ahsoka Tano, caught at the edge of the same tidal wave that will soon give birth to Darth Vader. The siege of Mandalore. Maul versus Ahsoka Tano. The assault on Mandalore begins with a sense of urgency that does not match its surface objective. On paper, it is a simple campaign. The Republic, with Ahsoka Tano at the head of a loyal clone legion, moves to remove Darth Maul from power. In reality, it unfolds in the shadow of something larger, as Anakin and Obi-Wan are pulled away to answer a desperate call from Coruscant and a Chancellor in peril. So the stage is set with an absence. The two Jedi who once defined Maul's hatred are gone, and in their place stands a former Padawan who no longer belongs to the temple, but still fights beside the clones she once commanded. The reason was simple. Ahsoka knew Mandalore was a powder keg, and she knew Maul was at its center. What she did not know was that the entire Clone War was already tilting toward its final, unseen command. Maul, however, feels it. As Republic gunships descend through Mandalore's burning skies, he does not pace or panic. He waits. There is an eerie calm around him, the stillness of someone who has stared too long into the same darkness that made him. Through the Force, he senses threads tightening, an order about to be given that will doom the Jedi for 1,000 generations to come. As a result, his usual fury is tempered by something rarer in his story: dread. When Ahsoka finally confronts him in the palace undercroft, their meeting is almost quiet. No blades at first, only words. Maul speaks of Sidious, of a grand design that began when he was taken as a child from Dathomir and turned into a weapon. He tells her the Clone Wars are not a conflict to be won, but a ritual to be completed. And then he offers something unthinkable: an alliance. He asks Ahsoka to join him to stop Sidious's true chosen apprentice before it is too late. Not Dooku, not Grievous, Anakin Skywalker. For you, as a viewer, this is one of those pattern interrupt moments where the entire war seems to tilt. Maul, the monster of Naboo, is trying, through his own warped lens, to prevent the birth of Darth Vader. Ahsoka cannot accept it. Her training, her attachment, every memory of Anakin as a kind but troubled mentor stands in the way. She believes Maul about Sidious, but not about the man she still sees as a heroic Jedi Knight. That fracture of understanding is what ignites their duel. In the throne room, blue and red blades crash amid stained glass and Mandalorian steel. Then the fight spills out onto the towering support beams above the city, the two of them balanced between sky and fire. Maul is powerful, brutal, lashing out with the desperation of someone who has seen the future and cannot make anyone listen. Ahsoka is agile, centered, drawing on years of training under Anakin without yet knowing the shadow gathering over him. She disarms him not with hatred, but with resolve, and the clones bring him down in a web of cables. As they bind him, Maul does not curse them as soldiers. He screams at the coming storm, howling in terror and rage as he feels Order 66 racing toward them through the Force. He knows the shape of what is about to happen, knows the Jedi Order is seconds from execution, and yet he is helpless to stop it. And as those screams echo through the hangar, the question becomes not whether Maul was right, but how Ahsoka and Anakin will survive what comes next. Order 66, an escape. Maul survives another purge. Those screams in the hangar are still echoing when the galaxy changes forever. One moment, the clones are soldiers Maul has studied and manipulated throughout the war. The next, their voices harden, their movements sharpen, and an invisible command races through them like a cold wave. Order 66 arrives not as a speech or a ceremony, but as a sudden, merciless shift in behavior. From Maul's vantage point, it is almost clinical. He feels the Jedi dying through the Force, like lights being shattered across a darkened ceiling. He hears the confusion in Ahsoka's orders, sees Rex fighting an instruction buried deep in his mind, and understands that something more precise than simple hatred is unfolding. The Republic does not fall with fanfare. It simply turns. The same troops who once defended the temple now hunt Jedi across the galaxy. On the cruiser above Mandalore, that turn becomes an opportunity. The ship is tearing itself apart, systems failing, alarms howling in every corridor. Ahsoka frees Maul as a desperate distraction, expecting him to create chaos. He does. But he also does something else. He watches. He listens. He notes how the clones speak of traitorous Jedi with absolute certainty, how their loyalty has been rewritten in an instant. He walks through blaster fire without a weapon, ripping bulkheads open with the Force, hurling troopers into ceilings and machinery. Entire squads die without ever seeing his face clearly. To them, he is just another target. To him, they are proof that Sidious has moved his final piece. As a result, Maul is not surprised when the cruiser begins its fatal descent. He has seen this pattern before. Sidious builds something, uses it, then discards it the moment it has served its purpose. In the confusion of the crash, Maul slips away once more into the shadows. No triumphant escape, no loyal army waiting. Just wreckage, smoke, and the distant roar of a new regime taking shape. Unlike the Jedi, he has no illusions about what this means. He knows Sidious's signature. The reason was simple. This is the victory his master promised for 1,000 generations of Sith ambition, simply wearing a new name, the Galactic Empire. For Maul, the realization is isolating. He has no master now, only a shadow that rules from Coruscant. He has no formal apprentice, only broken remnants of allies scattered by war. His power base on Mandalore is shattered, his shadow collective fractured, his name marked as expendable by the very architect of this new order. So, in this imperial age, Maul begins to shift again. Not a general on open battlefields, not a Sith assassin operating in the light of a false republic. Instead, he will descend fully into the underworld, where empires still need smugglers, syndicates, and quiet violence. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you will see him reappear, not as a warrior king, but as a hidden crime lord, pulling new strings from the darkest corners of the galaxy. From warlord to crime lord, the seeds of Crimson Dawn. Maul disappears from public history, but he does not stop moving. His armies are gone, his banners torn down. Yet the habits of a warlord do not simply fade. They adapt. They sink underground. In the long shadow of the Clone Wars, while the Jedi fall and a new Imperial Order rises, Maul quietly turns back to the one arena that never truly closed to him, the criminal underworld. The reason was simple. Governments change, temples burn, but crime survives. Many of the syndicates he once bent into the Shadow Collective lose ships, soldiers, and leaders. Yet a few lieutenants endure. A Black Sun Vigo here, a Pike negotiator there. Maul reaches out through whispers and intermediaries, never exposing himself for long, always testing where loyalty can still be bought with fear, favors, or the memory of old victories. As a result, the scattered embers of his wartime network begin to glow again, this time without Mandalorian armor or overt flags. Over the years, that quiet rebuilding hardens into something new. By the era of the young Han Solo, the galaxy knows a name Maul never used during the war: Crimson Dawn. On the surface, it is a sleek, almost elegant syndicate, dealing in spice, weapons, and information. It operates at the intersection of crime and politics, where governors look the other way and imperial officers accept discreet payments to reroute patrols. To most, Crimson Dawn is just another cartel with better manners. But in a private holocron on a lonely ship, the curtain lifts. At its apex sits Maul, cloaked and calm, his presence more like a rumor made flesh than a visible ruler. He designs it that way. Unlike the days of the Shadow Collective, Maul no longer stands at the front of every operation. Instead, he rules through refined intermediaries. Dryden Voss becomes his charming, sadistic face in high society, the man who hosts parties while arranging quiet executions. Later, Kira steps into that role, a former street child whose hard-won discipline and emotional control make her uniquely suited to balance attachment and ambition. They manage the day-to-day smuggling, the debts, the shifting alliances, while Maul remains distant, a name spoken carefully in guarded rooms. This distance marks a change in method, not in desire. He still seeks power, but not as a general on open battlefields. Now he manipulates ledgers instead of troop deployments, favors instead of fleets. A missed payment here, a manufactured crisis there, each move tightening his grip. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can feel how his war has simply become quieter, its weapons reduced to contracts, secrets, and the lingering fear of what happens if you disappoint the unseen master. Yet beneath that precision, the old wounds never close. Every careful scheme still bends, however slightly, toward two obsessions: the Jedi who cut him down on Naboo, and the Sith master who discarded him. Even as he builds Crimson Dawn into a hidden empire, Maul's thoughts circle back to Obi-Wan and Sidious. For 1,000 generations, Sith and Jedi have defined themselves through rivalry and revenge, and Maul is no different. His new syndicate is not just a business, it is a staging ground, a way to gather strength for confrontations he cannot release, no matter how far he drifts into the underworld. That unresolved hatred will shape the final phase of his story, when quiet criminal power is no longer enough, and he is drawn once more into the open, toward twin suns and an ending he cannot yet see. Between canon windows, Maul's missing years. But then the camera of canon pulls back. The criminal empire is in place, the syndicates are whispering his name, and yet, for a long stretch of years, Darth Maul himself slips into the shadows. Star Wars does something very deliberate here. It does not show you every step. There is the fall of the Republic. There is the rise of the Empire. Vader walks out of the temple, the Jedi Order burns, and the Inquisitors begin their patient, merciless work. Somewhere in that same galaxy, Maul is still alive, still moving pieces on the board, but the official canon leaves wide, quiet spaces between his confirmed appearances. The reason was simple. Some stories were meant to remain half-glimpsed, so that future tales could still surprise you. What we do know is solid. On paper, Maul stands at the top of Crimson Dawn, one of the great syndicates that grew from the roots of his old Shadow Collective. The Pikes, Black Sun, the underworld of Mandalore and beyond, all left him with contacts, debts, and leverage. In Solo, he speaks to Chira not as a wandering exile, but as a hidden master, coordinating operations from afar, rather than igniting his blade in every confrontation. As a result, his power becomes less visible and more insidious, like a dark current under the surface of the Force. Over time, the pattern is clear. Maul pulls back from public action. He lets lieutenants and proxies stand in the light, while he watches from the dark. No longer the obvious warlord striding through a throne room, but a name that crime lords fear to speak aloud. Canon hints that the Shadow Collective never truly dies. It simply condenses into Crimson Dawn, tighter, more secretive, better suited to an era where the Empire crushes open defiance. In that same era, Vader and the Inquisitors hunt Jedi across the stars. Maul is no longer Sidious's enforcer. He is a rival, a loose end, and he understands exactly how thorough his former master can be. It is not hard to imagine him masking his presence in the Force, avoiding worlds where Imperial attention is strongest, and using smugglers and assassins as a screen between himself and the Emperor's gaze. Every choice would be shaped by fear, pride, and the memory of Sidious's lightning on Mandalore. These absences are not empty. They add to his mystique. Maul becomes almost a ghost, appearing at key moments and then vanishing again, leaving only rumors, broken syndicates, and the faint outline of an unseen hand. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can feel those missing years, like negative space around the scenes we do have. And then, the next time the canon brings him into clear focus, the setting has changed completely. Maul is no longer the rising crime lord planning his next campaign. He is a haunted seeker, chasing ancient knowledge on a forgotten Sith world, drawn not to armies or credits, but to visions, holocrons, and a final chance to strike at the destiny that has always eluded him. Malachor, the old Sith world, and the new apprentice. Malachor is not just a planet. It is a wound in the Force that never healed. Long ago, during a forgotten war between Jedi and Sith, a superweapon detonated here and turned an entire battlefield into stone. Warriors were frozen mid-strike, starships locked in place, their final screams silenced and preserved in black glass. For 1,000 generations, legends whispered that Malachor was cursed, and that nothing living should ever disturb its surface again. So when the ghost crew arrives, they are walking through a graveyard. Every step echoes through hollow halls beneath a shattered temple, every shadow hinting at some older, darker order that predated the Republic they are trying to save. Ezra Bridger is still, in many ways, a child in his training, eager to prove himself, eager to protect his found family. The reason was simple. He has already lost too much, and he will do almost anything to keep from losing more. This is where Maul reappears, not as the roaring Sith assassin of Naboo, or the armored warlord of Mandalore, but as a stooped, frail old man shuffling through the ruins. His horns are worn, his movements careful, his voice almost gentle. It is a deliberate contrast, a pattern interrupt that makes both Ezra and the viewer pause. How could this bent figure be the same Maul who once carved through Jedi with animal fury? Maul understands fear and attachment better than most Jedi ever did. As a result, he knows exactly which strings to pull. He presents himself to Ezra as a fellow survivor of the endless Jedi-Sith conflict, someone abandoned by both sides, someone who has seen how fragile friends and families truly are in this galaxy. He does not speak first of hatred, he speaks of protection, of power as a shield instead of a blade. He calls Ezra boy, but he also calls him apprentice. He guides him through the labyrinth beneath the petrified battlefield, coaching him on how to bypass traps, how to read the ancient Sith temple, how to draw on his anger without flinching. To Ezra, starved for guidance outside the rigid rules of the order Kanan is trying to rebuild, this feels like a different kind of teaching, more direct, less restrained. You can almost feel the lure. At the heart of Malachor waits the Sith holocron, a crystalline vessel of knowledge and will. Together, Maul and Ezra unlock it and channel its vision through the temple's superweapon. In that shared moment, the Force opens like a fracture, showing possible futures, hidden enemies, and a single, burning thread that grips Maul's mind. Kenobi. Obi-Wan is alive, somewhere out there, still a guardian of the light that ruined his life. From this point in Rebels, Maul's purpose narrows to a knife's edge. He no longer schemes to rule the galaxy or command armies. All of that has burned away. What remains is one final obsession: to find Obi-Wan Kenobi, confront the living symbol of his failure, and end the story that began on Naboo, no matter the cost to himself or anyone around him. So sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, because Malachor is only the beginning of Maul's last hunt. Master and pawn. Maul's manipulation of Ezra Bridger. Malachor is only the beginning, because Maul's hunt does not stay focused on Obi-Wan for long. It bends. It adapts. It latches onto a new opportunity in the form of a single, confused child of the Force. Ezra Bridger. Darth Maul has been many things in this story, but with Ezra, he becomes something he has never truly been allowed to be before: a teacher. Or at least, that is what he tells himself. From the moment they meet among the petrified remains of the ancient Sith temple, Maul recognizes something painfully familiar. Ezra is powerful but unpolished, a survivor of loss who wears his anger like armor and hides his longing for attachment behind bravado. The reason was simple. Maul is looking at a reflection of his own stolen childhood on Dathomir, stripped from family and thrown into training that taught him to kill before he could fully understand why he was fighting. So Maul leans in. He calls Ezra boy and apprentice in the same breath, guiding his hands through Sith incantations, showing him how to open holocrons and awaken weapons that should have stayed buried. He does not tell Ezra to abandon love. Instead, he quietly twists it. He urges him to draw on fear of losing his friends, to let that fear become fuel. Protect them, Maul suggests, by becoming strong enough to strike first. It sounds noble. It feels necessary. It is the same poisoned logic that once turned Maul into Sidious's blade. Again and again, Maul nudges Ezra toward darker choices. On Malachor, he encourages him to trust a former Sith over his own master, Kanan. On Dathomir, he leads him into Night Sister rituals that blur the line between communion and possession, telling him that the Jedi Order has lied, that the Sith have lied, and that only through Maul can he see clearly. This is framed as a third path beyond Jedi and Sith, a way to stand outside both failing traditions. But that promised freedom is an illusion. What Maul is really offering is his own unresolved trauma, replayed with a different child in the starring role. He cannot imagine a life without obsession and violence. So every lesson he gives Ezra bends back toward those same patterns. As a result, his mentorship is both seductive and hollow, warm in tone, yet cold in purpose. The crucial difference is that Ezra is not alone. Where Maul once had only Sidious and the cruelty of secret training far from any temple, Ezra has Kanan's patience, Hera's steadiness, and the quiet, stubborn loyalty of the Ghost Crew. They argue with him. They pull him back. They remind him that his power is not the only thing that matters. That support network becomes the shield Maul never had, and it keeps Ezra from falling completely into the shadow being offered to him. Even so, Maul does not leave empty-handed. He may fail to claim Ezra as a true apprentice, but he succeeds in using him as a living key, through the combined vision of Jedi and Sith holocrons, and later through dangerous Dathomiri magic. Maul finally extracts the one piece of knowledge he has chased for years, the location of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And once that name resurfaces, everything in Maul's world narrows again to a single point on the map, and to the final confrontation waiting beneath twin suns. Twin suns in a vision. Maul learns Obi-Wan still lives. That single point on the map does not come easily. It arrives through one of the most dangerous experiments with the Force that we ever see. The moment when a Jedi holocron and a Sith holocron are forced open together, their knowledge colliding in the mind of a child and a broken warrior. On Malachor, Maul convinces Ezra Bridger that the only path forward is revelation. A Jedi holocron taken from the temple and a Sith holocron steeped in hate are brought together in Maul's hands. He speaks with almost priest-like calm as he guides Ezra into position, asking the boy to focus, to open himself, to ignore the fear that any sane Jedi would feel at such a ritual. The reason was simple. Maul believes that only by uniting light and dark can they tear open the future and demand answers from it. The convergence is slow at first. Two crystals, two repositories of thought, begin to glow and then to burn. Ezra and Maul both cry out as the holocrons fuse into a single blinding point, pouring visions into them. Time stops, space thins. For a heartbeat, it feels as though the entire galaxy is speaking at once. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can almost imagine the sensation. Fragments of 1,000 possible paths, layered over one another like shards of glass. Ezra sees symbols he cannot name, worlds he does not recognize. A tower, a hallway, flashes of his friends in danger. The information is too much, arriving without context or training. It is confusing and incomplete, like trying to remember a dream while it is still being written. He reaches for a clear answer about how to save those he loves, but every time he grasps at one image, 3 more slip away. For Maul, the storm is different. In the chaos, certain pieces lock into place. A desert horizon, a small, humble dwelling, and above it all, twin suns hanging low in the sky. To anyone else, it might be only a landscape. To Maul, it is a revelation. Twin suns mean a specific kind of exile, a specific kind of hiding. They mean that Obi-Wan Kenobi did not die with the old order, but lives on somewhere beneath that burning light. His reaction is almost painful to watch. There is elation because his enemy still breathes. There is rage because the wound of Naboo has been left open, festering for years. And there is a strange, quiet relief, as if the Force itself has finally acknowledged the depth of his suffering and offered him one last chance to resolve it. As a result, when the holocrons are torn apart and the vision ends, Maul is not left confused like Ezra, he is clarified. Here, he staggers away from Malachor with a new obsession, but it feels older than anything else in his story. The image of twin suns becomes a compass. It will pull him across the stars one final time, not as a conqueror building empires, but as a haunted man seeking closure at the edge of the desert. And Maul will not be the only one drawn toward that lonely world, waiting quietly beneath its endless blinding sky. The long search. Maul hunts the hermit of Tatooine. Maul follows that compass, slowly, methodically. The reason was simple. This was no longer the frantic chase of a young assassin, but the last pilgrimage of a man who has lost almost everything to the Force and to the Jedi who wield it. After the holocron vision, the image of twin suns settles in his mind like a fixed star. He abandons broader ambitions. No more empires. No more grand designs against the Sith Order. Every contact he has left every forgotten cache of information from his days as a shadow agent of Sidious becomes fuel for a single purpose. He digs through old intelligence reports, half-buried hyperspace charts, and the memories of smugglers who once ran spice through the Outer Rim. World by world, rumor by rumor, he begins to close the circle. This search stretches across the galaxy, but it is strangely quiet. Maul plants tracking beacons on ships, splices into old Imperial and Republic networks, and listens. When he crosses paths with the crew of the Ghost, he does not strike them down. Instead, he weaves himself into their story, using their compassion as a tool. As a result, the former Sith apprentice becomes something almost colder than the enraged warrior of the Clone Wars. He becomes patient. He manipulates Ezra Bridger with the same precision Sidious once used on him. A shared holocron, a promise of secret training, hints of power that might save friends and protect attachments. Maul dangles answers in front of a lonely child who has already felt the cost of war, knowing that curiosity and fear will do the rest. Every time Ezra reaches out through the Force, Maul listens for an echo, for any trace of the old Jedi Master he hates and cannot let go. Piece by piece, the trail leads him back toward the Outer Rim. Old star maps, the angle of the twin suns in his vision, and faint records from long ago Republic patrols narrow his focus. There is a desert world he remembers from another life, when he hunted a queen and her Jedi guardians, Tatooine. The name resurfaces like a scar beneath new skin. It is dry, remote, and insignificant by most measures. But Maul understands that for 1,000 generations, the Force has favored such forgotten places when destiny is about to turn. By the time he reaches Tatooine, his rage has cooled into something almost meditative. He walks the dunes at dusk, feeling the temperature fall and the sky deepen, letting the silence of the desert press in around him. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can almost see him as a dark mirror of a wandering Jedi, cloaked, alone, listening to the wind. In Star Wars Rebels, he uses Ezra one final time, sending the boy stumbling into danger under those same twin suns. Maul knows Obi-Wan's pattern. The old Jedi will not ignore a young life in peril. He never has, not since he first took a frightened child from Tatooine's sands and led him to the temple. So on a cold night in the desert, beneath a vast star-filled sky, the circle finally closes. Two figures step into the firelight among the dunes. The man who was cut in half on Naboo and the man who survived him stand face to face at last, while the galaxy sleeps and the twin suns wait just below the horizon. Twin suns, the final duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi. The desert is almost silent. Only the soft hiss of wind over sand and the faint crackle of a small campfire disturb the stillness. Obi-Wan Kenobi sits alone in that glow, wrapped in simple robes, his life reduced to something almost monastic as he watches over a distant homestead and the unseen child within it. He does not speak the boy's name. He does not write it or share it with the few beings who still cross his path. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi had guarded the galaxy openly, with temples and councils and bright blades held high. Now, their last true guardian hides in the dunes like a wandering hermit, his purpose narrowed to a single life under twin suns. Into that quiet, Maul comes. His ship falls from the night like a dark thought, cutting across the stars above Tatooine's sands. He follows the echo in the Force that has haunted him for years, the presence he has hunted from world to world. When he steps into the circle of firelight, the red and black of his face looks older, more carved by hatred, but his voice still carries the same cold certainty as he calls Obi-Wan's name. The confrontation is simple. No armies, no thrones, just two men and a dying fire. Maul studies the way Kenobi stands, the way his eyes keep drifting, almost imperceptibly, toward the horizon where that homestead lies. And then he understands. Obi-Wan is not hiding for himself. He is guarding something, someone. The reason was simple once he allowed himself to see it. If Kenobi has exiled himself to this forgotten world, then the child he protects must be the key to ending Sidious and his empire. When their blades ignite, the duel is over almost before it begins. Blue and red cross in the dark, and in those few motions their entire shared story repeats itself. Obi-Wan opens in the familiar, aggressive stance of his youth, the posture Maul first faced on Naboo. Then, slowly, he shifts. His saber rises into the calm, centered guard you might recognize from Qui-Gon Jinn, a quiet echo of the master they both lost. Here, the choreography becomes a lesson. Maul commits to the same maneuver he used to kill Qui-Gon, a swift strike to break the guard and a smashing blow to the head. But Obi-Wan has carried that moment for decades. As a result, he anticipates the angle, cuts through Maul's guard, and ends the fight with a single, decisive stroke. It is over in 3 beats. It took them a lifetime to reach. Maul falls into Obi-Wan's arms, rage finally giving way to clarity. His voice is softer now as he asks the question that has haunted the entire order. Is the boy the chosen one? Obi-Wan answers with a quiet affirmation, not as a warrior, but as a weary guardian who has seen too much loss. Maul dies believing that this child will one day destroy Sidious and avenge them both. And if you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, you can feel how that small, lonely fire becomes the turning point for the whole galaxy. A quiet death. Maul's last words and what they mean. Maul's last moments under the twin suns are quiet, but they are not empty. The duel ends in a single, decisive movement, and with that, a lifetime of rage begins to drain away. When he speaks to Obi-Wan now, the familiar venom is still there, but something underneath it has changed. His voice is softer, the edges are frayed. Hatred has not vanished, yet it has been joined by a kind of weary recognition that the fight between them is only a fragment of a much larger story. For years, Maul had screamed Obi-Wan's name into the void. He blamed this one Jedi for his fall on Naboo, for his shattered body, for the years spent in darkness on Lotho Minor. But as he lies in Obi-Wan's arms, he does not accuse him of that old wound. He asks about the child. He reaches, with failing strength, for the idea of the chosen one. The reason was simple. In that small figure crossing the desert, Maul sensed the same current of destiny that once swept him from Dathomir, and he needed to know whether this time the current might finally turn against Sidious. In that question, Maul quietly reframes his entire life. He is no longer only the enemy of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He is a discarded weapon of Darth Sidious, a victim of the Sith Master who stole him as a child, trained him in secret, and then replaced him without hesitation. He is a casualty of a galaxy-spanning order and counter-order that used children as instruments, whether in the Jedi Temple or in hidden Sith lairs. When Maul whispers that the chosen one will avenge them, he is not just speaking of a personal rivalry. He is placing himself and Obi-Wan for a single heartbeat on the same side of a wound carved by the same master. Obi-Wan's response is not triumph. He does not let Maul fall into the sand. He catches him, supports his weight, and holds him close as the light fades. This is the old Jedi. training at its best, compassion extended even to an enemy, even to the being who killed his mentor, who hunted him across the galaxy, who tried to break everything he cared about. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi were taught to see beyond attachment and beyond revenge. In this moment, Obi-Wan lives that teaching with a quiet steadiness that says more than any victory speech ever could. For Maul, that embrace and that affirmation are the only absolution he will ever receive. He dies believing that the Chosen One will destroy Sidious and, in doing so, give meaning to his suffering. As a result, there is a faint suggestion of peace in his final breath, a sense that his pain might become one thread in a larger tapestry that finally unravels the Sith. The twin suns continue to burn overhead, indifferent yet constant, as if watching another small, tragic flame go out. From here, the sands of Tatooine begin to feel less like an ending and more like a vantage point. To understand what truly dies in Obi-Wan's arms, you have to step back from this quiet death and look at the life that led to it. The stolen child on Dathomir, the perfect assassin forged by Sidious, the warlord of Mandalore, and the broken survivor who refused to let go. Because only then does his final question, and Obi-Wan's answer, reveal what Maul was really fighting for all along. Was Maul ever truly a Sith Lord? So when Maul dies in Obi-Wan's arms, whispering about the Chosen One, another question hangs over that moment like a shadow. Was he ever truly what he believed himself to be, a Sith Lord? Or was he something smaller and sadder from the very beginning? To answer that, you have to look at what the Sith promised him and what they actually gave. Under the rule of 2, the structure is simple on the surface. There is a master and an apprentice, one to embody power and one to crave it. The apprentice is meant to grow, to learn every secret of the dark side, and one day to either overthrow the master or be replaced by someone stronger. For 1,000 generations of Sith tradition, this cycle of betrayal and succession is what kept their order lean, hidden, and terrifyingly focused. In theory, Maul fits neatly into that pattern. He is the apprentice to Darth Sidious, taken as a child from Dathomir, put through brutal training until his whole world narrows to the Jedi temple he must one day burn. He learns to fight, to endure pain, to pour every fear and attachment into hatred. On paper, he is the next step in the Sith line, the blade that will one day turn on its owner. But Sidious's behavior tells a different story. Maul is kept secret, tucked away from the larger galactic game, while Palpatine moves in the Senate, plays the Chancellor, and watches the Jedi Council from the very heart of the Republic. Maul waits in the shadows as a hidden weapon. The reason was simple. Sidious did not treat Maul like a future rival. He treated him like a tool. When Naboo goes wrong and Maul is cut in half, Sidious discards him without hesitation. There is no search, no attempt to reclaim the broken apprentice. Instead, he moves on to Count Dooku, a fallen Jedi with political reach, wealth, and a public face. Later, when Maul claws his way back to power, Sidious returns only to break him again, using him as bait to draw out Mother Talzin and to test other pieces on his board. As a result, Maul's life becomes proof that he was never trusted as a true heir. In this light, Maul looks less like a partner in the rule of 2 and more like a prototype. Sidious wanted to see how far a stolen child could be pushed, how completely the Force could be twisted into a living weapon, without ever surrendering real strategic control. Maul commands assassinations, not armies. He is sent to kill Jedi, not to negotiate treaties or reshape the order of the galaxy. That contrast becomes sharper when you place him beside Dooku and Vader. Dooku leads the separatist movement, directs fleets, and shapes galactic law. Vader stands at the Emperor's right hand, overseeing the purge of the Jedi, commanding legions, deciding which worlds live or die. Both are allowed to operate in the open, to wield political and military authority as extensions of Sith will. Maul, by comparison, is always just outside the real center of power, even when he sits on Mandalore's throne. So his later attempts to build something of his own, the Shadow Collective, his rule over Mandalore, even his strange mentorship with Ezra Bridger, can be read as a delayed attempt to finally become what he was promised. He trains Ezra in fragments of Sith doctrine, pushes him toward hatred, and dreams of using the boy as both student and ally. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold across the Clone Wars and Rebels, you can feel Maul reaching for the title of Sith Lord in his own right, long after Sidious has cast him aside. Yet he never fully escapes that original shadow. Sidious still defines the era. The rule of two still moves on without him. Maul's empires are temporary, his apprentices uncertain, his victories always undermined by a larger design he cannot see. In the end, he is a man who tried to step into a role that was never truly offered, chasing a place in an order that had already decided he was expendable. That tension between what Maul thinks he is and what the Sith actually used him for shapes every choice he makes. It explains his fury when Sidious appears on Mandalore. It colors his desperation on Malachor, when he clings to Ezra as both weapon and companion. And it gives his death on Tatooine its quiet weight, because the man who dies there is not the rightful heir of the Sith, but the failed experiment who still cannot stop believing in their promise. In that way, Maul becomes a mirror for the Sith themselves, an order built on betrayal, producing followers who are never sure if they are chosen successors or just temporary tools. And as his story moves from secret apprentice to discarded survivor, it raises a darker question about the next great enforcer Sidious will shape, one who will finally stand at the center of the Empire Maul was never allowed to touch. Weapon, victim, or villain, reframing Maul's tragedy. Maul's path, from the outside, can look brutally simple. He appears, kills without hesitation, and leaves a trail of bodies and broken worlds behind him. Yet when you slow the story down, when you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, a more complicated figure starts to emerge. There is no way around what he does. Maul orders massacres on Mandalore, oversees torture chambers in the Sundari Palace, and builds a criminal empire that feeds on fear across the galaxy. He engineers political coups, topples governments, and treats civilian lives as expendable tools in his war against the Jedi and against his former master. The suffering he causes is real and enormous. For thousands of people, Darth Maul is not a tragic figure at all. He is simply the monster who arrived and never left. But monsters, in Star Wars, rarely appear from nowhere. Maul begins as a child on Dathomir, born into the shadow of the Night Sisters, and handed over to Darth Sidious long before he can understand what choice even means. The reason was simple. Sidious wants a weapon, not a son. Maul is taken from his family, removed from any temple or order that might have given him structure, and raised in isolation, where every lesson is pain, and every success is measured in how efficiently he can kill. Under that training, his value is narrowed to a single point. He is told he exists to destroy Jedi, that mercy is weakness, that attachment is a lie. When he fails on Naboo and is cut down by Obi-Wan, the collapse is total. Being left for dead does not just break his body. It confirms the deepest message Sidious ever gave him. You are useful until you are not, and then you are nothing. So his obsession with Obi-Wan is not only about a duel lost, it is a displaced answer to older wounds. The betrayal of Sidious, the loss of Mother Talzin and Dathomir, the slow realization that he was never meant to stand beside the Dark Lord, only in front of him as a shield. Each time Maul claws his way back from the junk world, from defeat on Mandalore, he speaks Kenobi's name, but underneath it, he is raging at an entire system that turned him into an expendable blade. And still, there are moments when something else flickers through. His bond with savage Opress is clumsy and violent, yet there is a raw protectiveness there, a refusal to surrender his brother even when it puts him at odds with Sidious. With Ezra Bridger, he shifts uneasily between manipulation and something almost like mentorship, guiding the boy through temples and visions as if testing the life he might have lived as a different kind of teacher. These are not redemptions, but they are hints. As a result, Maul becomes very difficult to file neatly away. He is a villain who chooses cruelty again and again, and a victim shaped by forces that, for 1,000 generations, have been grinding people into weapons, Sith, Jedi, soldiers, and slaves alike. Holding both truths at once is uncomfortable, yet important, because soon another enforcer will rise under Sidious, one whose story will echo Maul's in quieter, more devastating ways. Systems of control. How the Sith and the galaxy failed. Maul's tragedy is not only personal, it is structural. From the moment Sidious marked him on Dathomir, his fate was woven into systems designed to use him up and cast him aside. Under Sith doctrine, apprentices are never meant to be safe. The rule of two promises intimacy, only master and apprentice. But its true purpose is constant tension, domination, and betrayal. Maul is trained to crave power, to dream of surpassing the Jedi and reshaping the galaxy. Yet he is denied the one thing a child like him needed most: trust. Sidious withholds information, hides the larger plan, and treats Maul as a disposable blade, not a partner. The reason was simple. A Sith apprentice who feels secure might stop being afraid, and fear is the leash Sidious prefers. This is why Maul's death on Naboo is almost an administrative event for his master. One weapon is lost, another, Dooku, is already waiting. For 1,000 generations, dark side lineages have repeated this pattern in different forms, but the Sith crystallize it into doctrine. As a result, Maul grows up fluent in the language of betrayal, yet utterly illiterate in loyalty that is not transactional. Around him, the larger galaxy makes this possible. The Republic's shining core worlds like Coruscant and Alderaan congratulate themselves on peace and prosperity, while the outer rim is left to fester. Worlds like Dathomir, with its Night Sister covens and warrior clans, fall outside the polite concern of the Senate and the Jedi Temple. No one comes to audit how children are being shaped there. No one asks why a boy strong in the Force vanished from a forgotten world. Sidious can steal Maul, twist him through brutal training, and present him years later as a Phantom Menace. And the system never even notices. When Maul returns and turns to the criminal underworld, it looks, at first, like freedom. Black Sun, the Pikes, the early seeds of Crimson Dawn. These syndicates give him ships, soldiers, and credits. He forges the Shadow Collective, conquers Mandalore through Death Watch, and for a brief moment rules from a throne instead of a pit. Yet these structures are built on fear as surely as the Sith are. The underworld rewards ruthlessness, punishes vulnerability, and traps him in endless cycles of violence. Any attempt at genuine attachment to Savage, to Mother Talzin, even to the idea of Mandalore as something more than a tool, is turned into another weapon or another loss. Maul's later efforts to break free of this pattern are quietly heartbreaking. On Mandalore, he tries to be more than an assassin, but Sidious arrives personally to crush his experiment. With the Shadow Collective, he imagines himself a third power in the war, only to watch his allies scatter the instant the larger machines of Republic and Separatists grind forward. Even with Ezra Bridger, when he reaches out in Star Wars Rebels, there is the faint outline of mentorship, of a twisted mirror to Jedi training. But the systems around them, Imperial rule, Sith doctrine, the criminal networks he still leans on, cannot allow that bond to become healing. It collapses back into manipulation and fear. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, Maul's life begins to look less like a series of random cruelties and more like an indictment of the galaxy itself. A stolen child, raised in secret, ignored by the Republic, armed by the underworld, and discarded by the Sith. His fall is what happens when no one with compassion has the power or the will to intervene. And in the shadow of his failure, Sidious is already preparing another broken weapon, one the Jedi will see every day inside their own temple and still be unable to save. Maul and the Jedi. Mirrors of failure and compassion. Maul's life keeps circling back to the Jedi, not as guides, but as mirrors that show him what he might have been and what he can never reach. Each encounter reflects a different answer to the same wound. What do you do when the galaxy breaks you and offers no hand to pull you up? With Obi-Wan, that question stretches across decades. On Naboo, Obi-Wan loses his master in front of him and answers that loss by clinging harder to the Jedi Order, to duty, to the quiet discipline of the temple and its training. Maul loses his purpose in the same moment, cut in half and left for dead, and he answers with obsession. For Obi-Wan, the duel of the fates becomes a scar he carries in silence. For Maul, it becomes the only song he can still hear. Every later clash between them is really about that first failure. On Florum, on Mandalore, Maul taunts Obi-Wan with Satine's death, trying to prove that compassion is a weakness, that attachment only leads to suffering. Obi-Wan grieves, but he does not break. He refuses to let hatred define him, even when he has every reason. And on Tatooine, under the twin suns, their final, almost instantaneous duel is less a fight and more a conversation. Obi-Wan has learned to accept loss. Maul has never learned anything else. Ahsoka Tano meets Maul from a different angle. She has walked away from the Jedi, carrying her own disillusionment with a council that could not see her clearly. He was never given a choice at all, taken as a child and shaped into a weapon. During the siege of Mandalore, their confrontation in the throne room is charged not only with the Force, but with recognition. Both know the Order is failing. Both see the shadow of Sidious looming. Yet where Ahsoka's break leads her toward independence and empathy, Maul's break leads him deeper into paranoia and control. Later, in the Age of the Ghost Crew, Maul tries again with new candidates. Ezra Bridger, and through him, Kanan Jarrus, represents something Maul never had. A small, stubborn community that refuses to let one wounded soul define itself by anger alone. Kanan's calm resistance to Maul's manipulations, and Ezra's eventual refusal to become his apprentice, show the quiet power of support. As a result, the same loneliness that once kept Maul alive now leaves him stranded. Behind all of this stands the Jedi Order itself, with its own blind spots. They did not create Maul directly, but their distance from the margins of the galaxy, from places like Dathomir, allowed Sidious to harvest children in the shadows. The reason was simple. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi believed their structure was enough, that if the temple was strong, the galaxy would be safe. They never asked who was being broken outside their walls. So when you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, Maul begins to sound like a cautionary echo of Anakin. Both are shaped by fear, by stolen childhoods, by isolation that festers where no one is looking. One is hidden in the underworld, the other in plain sight. And as Maul stumbles toward his final fate, Anakin is moving toward his, on a path that will test whether anyone has truly learned from the first weapon Sidious forged in secret. Maul and Vader, two enforcers, one empire. Maul walks so Vader can follow. One is the prototype hidden in the shadows, the other the finished design marching openly across the galaxy. Together, they show what Sidious truly wanted his enforcers to be. From Sidious's point of view, Maul is the first draft of Darth Vader, a child stolen from Dathomir, shaped by brutal training, taught that the Jedi are not just enemies of the Sith, but thieves who stole the galaxy from its rightful rulers. Maul is sent ahead of the invasion of Naboo as a living blade, tasked to hunt Jedi and crush resistance so the larger plan can unfold. The reason was simple. Sidious needed a weapon that could move unseen, kill without hesitation, and never question the order given. Vader will inherit that role on a far grander scale. When the Republic falls, Anakin does not just execute Sidious's will. He helps create the Empire itself. He marches into the Jedi Temple, slaughters the order that raised him, and then spends years as the visible terror of Imperial rule. Governors, admirals, and inquisitors answer to him. Maul, by contrast, never stands at the center of a formal hierarchy. After Naboo, his influence is rooted in the underworld. Mandalore, Black Sun, the Pikes, the early seeds of Crimson Dawn. So both men serve as hunters, yet their stories sit in different layers of the same design. Vader is the dark knight of the New Order. Maul is the ghost who moves through crime, warlords, and forgotten worlds. Vader is bound to Sidious by a deeply personal fall, by attachment to Padme, and the fear of losing her. Maul is bound by something colder, a lifetime of conditioning that never allowed any path but obedience and revenge. Each of them is also frozen around a single shattering moment. For Maul, it is Naboo, the duel of the fates, the shock of being cut in half by a Jedi he underestimated, the long years of madness that follow. For Vader, it is Mustafar, burning on the black sand while the friend he loved walks away. As a result, both lives become orbits around those defeats. Vader buries his pain beneath duty, becoming more mechanical in body and spirit. Maul clings to his hatred, rebuilding himself with spider legs, then with armies, then with schemes that always circle back to Obi-Wan. Here the pattern interrupts. Vader's story bends, slowly, toward a son, toward Luke, and the possibility of breaking the cycle that began with a frightened child in a desert slave quarters. Maul never finds that point of grace. He has allies, even apprentices, but no one he will truly save. His final act on Tatooine is not to rescue another soul, but to try to weaponize the Chosen One against Sidious. He dies in Obi-Wan's arms, still dreaming of vengeance he will never see. Seen beside Vader, Maul reveals Sidious's method with cruel clarity. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi tried to protect children like Anakin and Maul inside the Temple and the Order. Sidious does the opposite. He finds the wounded, the angry, the gifted, breaks them to his purpose, and discards them when a better piece appears. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, Maul's rise and fall feel less like an isolated tragedy and more like the first warning of what will happen when Sidious turns his full attention to the Skywalker line. Canon anchors, where Maul's story lives, across Star Wars. Maul's tragedy can feel so seamless in this telling that it is easy to forget how many different corners of the canon it comes from. His shadow passes across films, animation, and comics, each one catching a different angle of the same wounded weapon moving through the galaxy. On the surface, most people know him from the Phantom Menace. There, he is the silent assassin, a Sith enforcer who steps out of the shadows only long enough to hunt Jedi across Tatooine and Naboo. That film gives us his first rise and his first fall. The duel of the fates, the flash of blue and green blades, and the moment Obi-Wan's strike sends him into the abyss, seemingly ending his story before it has truly begun. But Maul's real afterlife unfolds in Star Wars, the Clone Wars. Across those animated arcs, we see him dragged from madness on Lotho Minor, rebuilt with new legs and an old hatred, and set loose to carve out his own power. The series shows his alliance with savage Opress, his bond with Mother Talzin, his conquest of Mandalore, and his open defiance of his former master. For 1,000 generations, Sith apprentices were meant to obey. Maul becomes the example of what happens when one refuses. Star Wars Rebels carries him into the twilight of his life. There, he is no longer a warlord, but a wanderer, clinging to prophecy and obsession. The show traces his manipulation of Ezra Bridger, his search for Kenobi, and that final, brief duel under the twin suns of Tatooine. In just a few quiet strokes, Rebels gives us his last attempt to find meaning, and his acceptance that the chosen one he sensed was never himself. Solo, a Star Wars story, adds another shard, revealing Maul as the hidden master behind Crimson Dawn. It hints at the criminal empire seeded by the Shadow Collective in the Clone Wars, showing how he turns from open war to the colder power of syndicates and fear. It is only a glimpse, but it confirms that his influence runs through the underworld, while Jedi and clones fight elsewhere. Between these on-screen chapters, comics and reference works fill in the spaces. Darth Maul, son of Dathomir, is especially important, continuing his struggle against Sidious and Dooku after his capture on Mandalore, and deepening his connection to Talzin and Dathomir's dark magic. Other canon materials sketch his early training, his time as a child taken from home, and his movements between one apparent death and the next. As a result, the fragments begin to link into a single, continuous line. This video has gently woven those official threads together, smoothing rough edges while staying anchored in what the canon actually shows. If you are awake and curious, we highly recommend exploring the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Son of Dathomir for yourself at another time, to watch each phase of his rise and fall unfold in detail. But if your eyes are heavy now, you do not need to remember every title or timeline. It is enough to carry the feeling of his life. A child forged into a weapon, a warrior cast aside, and a broken man who finally finds a quiet end beneath the stars. For tonight, you can simply sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold around you, even if you are already drifting beyond them. The evolution of a fighting style. From acrobat to old warrior, Maul's life can be traced without dates, without maps, and without dialogue. You can simply watch the way he moves, In each era, his fighting style becomes a quiet record of what the Force, the Jedi, and the Sith have carved into him. In the Phantom Menace, he is movement given shape, fast, fluid, almost beautiful. His double-bladed saber spins in wide, theatrical arcs, the red blades carving circles of light as he flips, twists, and whirls through the Theed power core. Every flourish announces his confidence as Sidious's assassin, a weapon honed since he was a child. The reason was simple. He had been trained to overwhelm, to frighten, to turn every duel into a storm that the more conservative Jedi style could not easily contain. That first duel with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan shows it clearly. He drives them back with spinning strikes, rapid kicks, and acrobatic lunges that use every inch of the environment. Leaping from catwalk to catwalk, pacing like a predator behind the energy gates, he seems tireless. There is very little restraint. No need yet for economy. His body believes it will never fail him. By the Clone Wars, the storm has changed. The same red blades ignite, but the man behind them is heavier now, rebuilt on metal legs and years of madness. The acrobat is still there, yet his movements carry weight and brutality. When he and savage Opress carve through clone troopers, there is less flourish and more dismemberment, each strike designed to break bone and armor rather than impress. As a result, his duels feel closer, more suffocating. He batters Pre Vizsla with powerful, almost primal blows, then shifts into precise counters when facing Obi-Wan again, hatred tightening his stance. Here, Maul fights like a warlord and a survivor. The graceful spins are shortened. The jumps are purposeful rather than showy. Every motion remembers being cut in half. The body that once expressed pure confidence now carries fear of failure, fear of loss, and a desperate attachment to power. His style becomes a refusal to be vulnerable a second time. Then, in Rebels, another transformation. The acrobat and the warlord give way to something quieter, older. Maul's posture is more stooped, his steps measured, his strikes small and exact. He leans on psychological manipulation, luring Ezra with soft promises, provoking Kanan with words before blades. When he finally confronts Obi-Wan on Tatooine, there are no long exchanges, no extended choreography. 3 moves, 1 opening, and it is over. That duel on the twin suns is a pattern interrupt in his own story. After decades of spinning violence, Maul dies in a clash so brief you could miss it if you blinked. But in that brevity, his whole evolution is visible. The initial probing strike, the recycled move meant to break Obi-Wan as it once nearly did on Naboo, and the final fatal counter that ends not just the fight, but the cycle. Across these phases, his combat style mirrors his inner life. Eager apprentice, burning bright and wide. Hardened warlord, compressing that fire into brutal efficiency. Weary hunter, relying on cunning and ritual more than muscle. Even if you forget the chronology, you can sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold simply by watching how his shoulders rise, how his footing narrows, how his saber slows. For 1,000 generations, warriors in this galaxy have carried their histories in their bodies. Maul is no different. His every scar shortens a step. Every betrayal tightens a grip. By the end, he is still dangerous, still deadly, but the spectacle has drained away, leaving only a tired man whose life has been spent in service to violence. His style, once a promise of limitless potential, becomes a quiet ledger of everything that promise cost him, and a reminder that even the fiercest weapon must one day lay still in the sand. Legacy in the shadows. What Maul leaves behind his body will stop in the sand. But the wake he leaves behind keeps moving. It moves through planets, through people, and through the quiet spaces between great battles where history usually forgets to look. Maul fails in every grand design he ever reaches for, yet the scars of his life are written across the galaxy in ways that never quite fade. Nowhere is that more literal than Mandalore. For a time, he holds the world in a clenched fist, bending Deathwatch, the throne, and even the once proud warrior culture to his will. The result is not lasting rule, but lasting damage. Civil war, occupation, and the slow erosion of Mandalorian unity all follow in the wake of his coup, echoing forward into the age of the Empire and beyond. Long after his banner falls, Mandalore is still paying the price for the moment a Sith outsider sat on its throne. The same pattern appears in the underworld. Maul's shadow collective fractures, but its structure does not vanish. Black Sun, the Pikes, and the seeds of Crimson Dawn survive, adapting his methods of centralized fear and secret coordination. When Kira later rises at the head of Crimson Dawn, she is walking paths Maul cleared, using techniques he refined. The reason was simple. He understood that if he could not rule as a Sith, he could still rule from the shadows. On a more personal level, his influence threads through individual lives. Ezra Bridger's brief apprenticeship to Maul on Malachor exposes the boy to a different kind of teacher, one who speaks openly of attachment and anger, while twisting both toward control. A single shared vision of twin sons is enough to redirect Ezra's journey and to pull Obi-Wan out of hiding for one last confrontation. With Kira, Maul becomes an unseen master, shaping her training in the criminal arts, showing her how to survive in a world where the force of institutions is always turned against the weak. Indirectly, he leaves marks on the Jedi and on the early rebellion. Obi-Wan's entire adult life is tied to this one enemy he defeated, yet never truly escaped. The loss of Qui-Gon, the duel on Naboo, the fall of Satine, and finally, the quiet encounter on Tatooine, all flow from Maul's obsession. Ahsoka's battles with him on Mandalore teach her that the Sith's plans are deeper than the Jedi Order understands, and that the temple she once called home is not prepared for what is coming. As a result, when the Empire rises, she and others who faced Maul are less surprised, more ready to move in the shadows. Symbolically, Maul stands as a reminder that the dark side does not only seduce fallen heroes like Anakin, it can take a child from birth, strip away every other possibility, and still end in ruin. There is no happy Sith, only different shapes of emptiness. And outside the story, his return changes Star Wars itself. A character presumed dead after a single film becomes, through animation and later tales we highly recommend exploring, proof that the saga can stretch sideways into new eras, new tones, and quieter tragedies. His survival on Lotho Minor, his rise in the Clone Wars, his final fall in Rebels, all invite you to sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold in unexpected directions. For 1,000 generations, legends in this universe have been about knights, empires, and chosen ones. Maul's legacy is smaller, narrower, but no less enduring. He is the current beneath the surface, the shadow behind the obvious villains, the wound that never quite closes. And as we move into the final stage of his life, that lingering presence will matter more than ever. A life defined by one name, Obi-Wan as Maul's axis. Maul's presence is that lingering wound, and at the center of it, one name keeps echoing through the years, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The reason was simple on the surface. This was the Jedi who cut him in half. who ruined Sidious' design for a perfect assassin, who left him to die in the reactor shaft on Naboo. Their first encounter defines the rest. On Naboo, Maul is the hunter, driving Qui-Gon and his Padawan back through doors and corridors, a storm of red blades and focused hatred. He kills the master. He almost breaks the apprentice. And then, in a moment of overconfidence, he is split in two by the very Jedi he dismissed. That instant becomes the axis of his life. Everything before it is preparation. Everything after is reaction. Years later, when savage Opress drags him out of madness on Lotho Minor, Maul's first coherent word is Kenobi, not Sidious, not Jedi, one man. As a result, his rebirth is less a return to the galaxy and more a return to that reactor shaft. Every victory he pursues in the Clone Wars is framed by that loss. He builds the Shadow Collective, seizes Mandalore, and lures Obi-Wan into a trap not just to kill him, but to make him suffer, to mirror Maul's own humiliation. Yet the more Maul chases Kenobi, the more his hatred changes shape. It stops being about the Jedi Order in general and narrows into a single, consuming line of focus. Obi-Wan becomes structure, a goal, a reason to keep breathing when everything else, Sidious, Mandalore, even his brother, is taken away. Without that pursuit, Maul risks becoming what he fears most, a discarded weapon with no target, a child stolen from Dathomir who never chose his own path. Obi-Wan, meanwhile, walks a very different road. He loses Qui-Gon. He watches the temple he called home fall, the clones turn, Anakin become Vader. But instead of letting those wounds calcify into vengeance, he folds them into a quiet, disciplined grief. He protects Luke on Tatooine, lives in obscurity, and allows his life to narrow into guardianship. Where Maul turns pain outward into endless motion, Obi-Wan lets it settle inward into stillness. So when they finally meet again under the twin suns, their duel is almost shockingly brief. 2 old warriors, 3 strikes. It is not the acrobatics of Naboo or the sprawling chaos of Mandalore. It is a lifetime distilled, and in Maul's last moments, cradled by the man he swore to destroy, there is a silence that feels like understanding. For a heartbeat, they are not Sith and Jedi, but 2 survivors of the same war, standing on opposite sides of the same wound. If you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, that small, wordless recognition becomes one of the quietest, most human beats in Maul's entire story. And it will shape the way his final legacy is remembered in the galaxy to come. From rage to quiet, letting Maul's story settle. From that moment of shared understanding, Maul's entire life begins to feel different in hindsight. The duels, the titles, the shifting alliances fade a little, and what remains is the quiet shape of one long, wounded life. A child of Dathomir, taken from the red mist and stone of his homeworld, turned away from any ordinary childhood before it could even begin. He is given to Darth Sidious as an offering, and the reason was simple. Maul was never meant to be a person in his own right. He was meant to be a blade. His training is not the structured discipline of the Jedi Temple, with its lessons on patience and balance. It is a furnace of pain, isolation, and constant reminders that the Jedi are his enemies, that compassion is weakness, that attachment is a chain to be broken. As a result, even his earliest memories are laced with fear and with the desperate need to prove that he deserves to exist. From there, the broad strokes of his story move almost on their own. The hidden apprentice unleashed on Naboo, the duel that should have secured his place in the New Order, and instead left him cut in half. falling into the dark. The years of madness on Lotho Minor, clinging to life through hatred alone. The rebirth at Talzin's hands, the spider legs replaced with new ones. The mind slowly pulled back together so that his rage could be given purpose again. He rises as a warlord, gathering the Shadow Collective, seizing Mandalore, forcing the galaxy to say his name with fear. But even then, underneath the armor and the titles, the same wound is still open. He has been abandoned once by Sidious, and he cannot bear the thought that his suffering might be meaningless. So he obsesses over Obi-Wan, over the Jedi Order, over the idea that if he can just win one more fight, take one more throne, the emptiness will finally be filled. Instead, Sidious returns to break him again. His brother dies in his arms. Mandalore slips away. The Sith master he once worshipped makes it clear that Maul was always expendable, a tool to be used and discarded. From that point on, his power remains, but his path narrows. Crime lord in the shadows, master of Crimson Dawn, a man who can move armies, yet cannot move past the moment his life was first stolen from him. When you sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold, his final years in exile begin to feel almost gentle in comparison. Wandering the galaxy, searching the Force for some sign that his pain can still be turned into victory. Finding only that same desert world where another former slave once looked at twin suns and dreamed of escape. By the time he dies in Obi-Wan's arms, Maul's story no longer feels like a sequence of spectacular battles. It feels like the long arc of someone who never had the chance to choose who he was. A stolen child, reshaped into a weapon, then left to discover, far too late, that his entire life has been orchestrated by systems and masters who saw him only as a means to an end. There is a quiet lesson in that, one that reaches beyond Sith and Jedi. When people are treated as tools, when fear and control replace compassion, the damage does not end when the war is over. It echoes forward, from Dathomir to Naboo, from Mandalore to Tatooine, carried in the lives of those who were never asked what they wanted to become. So as Maul's story settles in your mind, you might notice your own breathing slowing, your thoughts moving more softly. You may feel a small, unexpected sympathy for a man who spent his life chasing an enemy, only to realize at the very end that the true enemy was the hatred that had been placed inside him. In that realization lies the quiet power of letting go. If your eyes are growing heavier now, you can allow them to close. Let the distant hum of the galaxy recede a little. Maul's rage has burned itself out. What remains is only the memory of his journey, and the faint sense that, somewhere under those twin suns, a very old conflict has finally, mercifully, come to rest. Drifting through the galaxy, a soft recap of Maul's rise and fall. So now, with that old conflict quiet at last, the story begins to drift. It moves away from the moment of death and back through the places that shaped him, like a ship gliding slowly past distant stars. You can sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold one more time. Not as sharp memories, but as soft impressions. First, there is Dathomir, red mists curling over black stone, Night Sister magic whispering through the air. Somewhere in that crimson fog, a child is taken. The version of Maul who lives here is only a frightened child, already being pulled away from any ordinary life, already bound to a different order than the Jedi Temple would ever offer. The reason was simple. He was never meant to belong to himself. Then the vision slides to Coruscant's undercity, far below the shining towers. Wet metal, neon haze, echoes of distant speeders above. Here, Maul is an apprentice, training in the dark, a weapon being honed by Sidious in secret. Every breath is discipline. Every movement is preparation. For the moment he will ignite that double-bladed saber and step into the open galaxy at last. Naboo follows, bright and polished. All marble halls and sunlit plazas. In those gleaming corridors and open hangars, Maul is the assassin, striding forward with the calm of someone who believes fear is for other beings. The doors slide open. Red light spills out as both ends of his saber bloom into life. For a heartbeat, he is exactly what he was built to be. The light falls away, and we sink into the junk fields of Lotho Minor. Twisted metal, dripping tunnels, the scrape of spider legs on rusted beams. Here, Maul is a broken creature, clinging to life and to hatred. His mind frayed, but his will somehow unbroken. The Force has not left him. It just coils tighter, more desperate, more alone. From there, the path rises to Mandalore's cold, beautiful domes, city lights under a pale sky, throne rooms and shadows. Maul stands as a warlord now, the dark saber humming over Mandalore as he claims power he was never meant to hold. Armies move at his command. Yet under the armor and the titles, the same wound still burns. Malachor comes next, all stone and ash and ancient weapons. Statues of fallen warriors, frozen mid-strike. On this battlefield of another age, Maul becomes a mentor and a tempter, reaching out to lost students and frightened children, trying to shape them as he was once shaped. The double blade returns to his hands. Old patterns repeat. And finally, Tatooine. Quiet desert. Cool night. Twin suns sinking low, then gone. In this last place, he is an old hunter, moving slowly through sand that remembers other footsteps. The final image is simple. A red and black figure falling still in the desert. Twin suns setting on a life defined by pursuit. You do not need to hold each detail. You can let Dathomir's mists, Coruscant's shadows, Naboo's halls, Lotho Minor's scrap, Mandalore's domes, Malachor's stone, and Tatooine's sand blur together, like stars stretching into lines outside a viewport as a ship enters hyperspace. As a result, Maul's many faces become one continuous motion, one long exhale of anger and loss across the galaxy. If you notice your breathing now, you might feel it slowing. In, out, steady. The story is still there, but it is further away, like a distant transmission fading into static. What remains in this present moment is simply you, your body at rest, the quiet around you, and the gentle awareness that, for 1,000 generations, stories like this have risen and fallen, while listeners closed their eyes and drifted off to sleep. Returning from the dark, closing thoughts and gentle farewell. So as that awareness settles, we come to the quiet end of Maul's story for tonight. His life has been traced from a stolen child on Dathomir, to a weapon honed in secret by a Sith master, to a warlord who bent Mandalore and the criminal underworld to his will, and finally to a broken figure beneath twin suns. The arc is vast. The feeling it leaves behind is surprisingly small and still. Thank you for walking through it, or for drifting through it. Whether you stayed awake for every moment of his rise and fall, or let parts of this story blur into dreams while the Force hummed softly in the background, you still shared this journey. In a galaxy filled with noise and war and clashing blades, you chose to lie down, to listen, and to let a single, focused life pass slowly in front of you. Maul is remembered as a fearsome assassin, a red blade igniting in a hangar on Naboo, a silent shadow hunting Jedi through steel corridors. But beneath that image was a history built on pain, on training that began too early and never really stopped, on attachment twisted into obsession and revenge. The reason was simple. He was never taught how to be anything but a weapon. As a result, every choice he made bent back toward the same point, the same name, the same unfinished duel. When we look at him this way, the Star Wars galaxy becomes a little deeper and a little more human. The Sith apprentice carved apart on Naboo is the same mind that survived in the dark on spider legs, the same man who seized a throne on Mandalore, the same voice that finally asked, with his last breath, if the Chosen One would bring balance. Even the most terrifying figures who walked the temple steps or ruled from the shadows carry old wounds and lost possibilities inside them. If, on some other night, you feel ready to sit back, relax, and let the stories unfold again, we highly recommend exploring the lives that crossed Maul's path. Vader, whose own fall turned Maul's ambitions to dust. Ahsoka, once a child of the Order, who faced the chaos Maul unleashed on Mandalore. Obi-Wan, the quiet constant at the center of Maul's rage. Each of them holds another thread that runs through the same long tapestry, stretching back for 1,000 generations. For now, if you happen to be awake, and only if it feels easy, you are welcome to share a small trace of your own place in this galaxy. Perhaps where you listened from, or which moment in Maul's journey stayed with you the most. The madness in the junk world depths, the brief triumph on Mandalore, or that final stillness under the twin suns. And then, the focus can fade. Imagine the stars outside the viewport dimming one by one, until they are only faint pinpricks. The distant thrum of a hyperdrive becomes softer, then distant, then gone. The story folds itself away, like a holocron closing. What remains is your breathing, the weight of your body at rest, and the quiet echo of a life that burned bright, fell hard, and finally came to peace. You do not need to follow him any farther. You can simply rest here in the dark between stars.